Chapter 1308. It was snowing? It really was snowing. Xianxia, who had risen to the top of the Bailiang bureaucracy as a scholar of the Jiananhan clan, stood shoulder to shoulder with the provincial governor of Liuzhou, Yang Guangdou. Together, they gazed at the sky that was white from the snow. Compared to the tall and majestic city walls of the Central Plains, the short outer walls of Qingcang City were comical and laughable. This isolated city was located on the northwest frontier fortress. It was like a delicate woman pushed to the shore of a flooded river, ready to be killed by a wave at any moment. Xianxia reached out to catch the snowflakes that were still sparse and thin. He murmured, "In Great Peace City, those who withdraw from court in the snow are nobles and marquises." Yang Guangdou nodded and smiled. "Yes, we are not the same here. The snow covers the bows and knives, and the armor and heavy knives are heavier. However, the boorish people here can't say anything about nobles and marquises. At most, they could say something about a black hole at the mouth of a well." Xianxia smiled slightly and asked, "I once heard this story in Gangnam-do. It seems to have something to do with the great general?" Yang Guangdou rubbed his hands together. When Prince was still young, His Royal Highness, the great general, brought his family to Tidehark Lake to admire the snow. In the end, His Royal Highness forced him to write a poem. In his desperation, how could the great general write a poem? After scratching his head for a long time, the great general actually managed to come up with one. If I remember correctly, the entire poem was about snowflakes as big as fists and a black hole at the mouth of a well. A yellow dog in white clothes, a white dog. Xianxia smiled and asked, "And then?" Yang Guangdou said helplessly. The great general clearly couldn't continue. At the time, His Royal Highness chased after him for a long time. However, this absurd scene was often seen on Mount Qingliang. Everyone in the Wang Fu has long gotten used to it. At this point, Yang Guangdou felt a little sad. His voice was hoarse as he said softly, "At that time, the great general's legs were still very nimble. When he ran for his life, he ran as if he was flying." Xianxia exhaled and said with a smile, "Of all the Royal Highness in Liang, only Bailiang dares to be so disgraceful." Yang Guangdou smiled and said, "Isn't that so?" Liemo Fan hurriedly walked up to the top of the city wall. As the deputy general of the Longxiang army, he was indeed as unruly and difficult to tame as the rumors said. After entering Lu province, he had never stepped into the provincial governor's mansion, but today he actually took the initiative to meet the provincial governor, shocking the guards on the city wall. A while ago, the Longxiang army had disobeyed the orders of the governor-general house and split up their troops to attack. Both the military and the government of Liuzhou were already showing signs of hostility. Yang Guangdou turned to look at Liemo Fan and said with a smile, "Oh, rare guest, rare guest. Does Deputy General Li also have the elegance to climb high and admire the snow?" Liemo Fan frowned, but didn't take offense to the provincial governor's mockery. He said in a deep voice, "I don't know the details of the purple energy phenomenon and the arrows piercing through the air, so I won't talk about it. However, just now, the crossbowmen on the front lines reported that Gu Dongtan and Lu Gui's camp had urgently mobilized 3 cavalry units, all of them rushing toward Linyao City. Among them, Huyan Kachin and Yelu Zongtang's 2 great generals each led 500 light cavalry units. Lu Gui's trusted aide Lin Fu even led the Lu family army's 10,000 main cavalry units. There were even 200 heavy cavalry units hidden among them, ready to charge into battle at any time. Yang Guangdou's expression was grave. He asked, "They're rushing toward your Longxiang army's commander?" Liemo Fan grunted and rubbed his chin. His eyes were sinister. It seems that the Chang cavalry unit that came between Qingcang and Linyao City was bait. Yang Guangdou was furious when he heard this. He couldn't help but say that if he had known this would happen, he wouldn't have spoken so angrily in the beginning. Xianxia, who didn't have a high rank and was temporarily an advisor to the provincial governor, pulled on Yang Guangdou's sleeve and walked forward. He calmly asked, "Generally, Let's assume that the young prince's Longxiang army is already facing the 10,000 Chang cavalry. If the Chang cavalry evades the vanguard and intentionally lures the enemy in, will the dragon elephant cavalry be successful in their pursuit? Liu Fan sneered. As long as they're caught by our Longxiang army, unless the Chang cavalry choose to turn tail and run, they'll definitely be wiped out in less than 2 hours. Liu Fan reached out and pressed against the wall. What I'm afraid of now is that the Chang cavalry, who are best at running in circles, will blindly avoid battle and allow them to hold out until they meet up with Lin Fu's army. Liu Fan turned to look at Yang Guangdou, who was nominally the most powerful official in Liuzhou. This general entered the city not to ask for battle, but to say hello. This general will split 10,000 of the Longxiang army to follow Lin Fu. If the army that Lu Gui left at Gudong Beach takes the opportunity to move south, I will personally lead the remaining 10,000 dragon elephant cavalry to resist the enemy. Xianxia city will not be lost. Yang Guangdou finally couldn't hold back his anger. The war is about to begin. You dare to divide your forces when you're at a disadvantage, and keep on dividing. Liu Fan, to think that you were a general that the general thought highly of when he was alive. I, Yang Guangdou, am a layman who hasn't read many military books. Even I know that this is a taboo. The importance of Flow province lies not only in the fact that our side is defending Azure City to the death to restrain Lu Gui's army, but also in the fact that the 30,000 Dragon Elephant Cavalry is maintaining a posture of being ready to pull back, but not unleash it, so as to form a deterrent force to the entire Northern Mang Southern Dynasty. Neither of these two factors can be missing. If either of them is missing, then Liang Mang would have already lost the first great battle. Even if your Dragon Elephant Cavalry is exchanging 1 for 2, even if you, Li Mofen, have accumulated countless battle achievements, Northern Liang King will still cut off your head. You, Liu Fan, deserve to die. Liu Fan's expression was cold as he said stiffly, Provincial Governor Yang, this general has said that Xianxia City will not be lost. Even if we take a step back and say that the 10,000 Dragon Elephant Cavalry are all gone, as long as the general and Wang Lingbao can return to the vicinity of Xianxia City, Lu Gui will still have to be a coward. Right now, the most important thing is to ensure that the general of the Longxiang army will not meet with any accidents on the battlefield to the east of Linyao. Yang Guangdou took a step forward. Surnamed Li, the king of Bailiang has promised that I, Yang Guangdou, can do whatever I want in Liuzhou. Do you really think that I don't dare to act first and report later? Liu Fan's face was full of undisguised disdain. He tilted his head slightly and pointed at his neck. Why don't you come and try? Old man Yang, with your little ability, do you think you can chop off my head? Chen Shiliang didn't act as a peacemaker, only looking towards Gu Dongtan's side. He slowly said, Provincial Governor, sir, and General Li aren't wrong. It's just that matters have their priorities. Right now, we might as well plan for the worst. The appearance of the Chang cavalry was a trap set up by Northern Mang from the start. Now, since our Dragon Elephant army has already taken the bait, moreover, what Northern Mang wants to eat isn't just a few thousand Dragon Elephant army soldiers, but an even more important target, Commander-in-Chief Su Longxiang. In that case, I feel that the Northern Mang Southern Dynasty will definitely activate a relatively sinister backup plan. Who knows, it might even be a small group of Northern Mang's most outstanding martial experts. At the very least, they would be able to fight against the young prince. If Beimang succeeds, this loss will be unbearable for Xianxia City, all of Liuzhou, and even all of Beimang. Chun Shiliang continued, Since it's like this, I feel that mobilizing 10,000 Longxiang army is not too much. It's not enough. We also need to add all the crossbowmen we can use, as well as the white horse soldiers in the city. If possible, even the loyalists and spies hidden in Xianxia City should rush out of the city. Liu Fan nodded. Yang Guangdou also remained silent. Chen Shiliang turned his head and looked at Liu Fan. Generally, I don't want you to make any military pledge, nor do I want to hear some grand speech about being defeated. Right now, I only want to ask you one thing. You only have 10,000 Dragon Elephant Cavalry. Once Lu Gui's army resolutely charges south, can you guarantee that Xianxia City will last until the 20,000 Longxiang army returns? Liamo Fan's eyes were abnormally resolute. He said in a low voice, "I can." Liamo Fan smiled. He patted the Baoyong war blade at his waist and pointed outside the city with his other hand. "Chun Shiliang, it's fine if you don't trust me, Liamo Fan, but please trust this cold blade of mine. If one isn't enough, there are 10,000 outside the city." Chun Shiliang nodded. Liamo Fan turned around and strode away. Chun Shiliang suddenly turned to the back of this Baoyong frontier army general and said, "General Li, the Longxiang army soldiers are Baoyong people, and so are the people of Liuzhou. I never thought so before, but from now on, I will remember it." After saying this, the general with his back to the two civil officials suddenly raised his hand and gave a thumbs up. Chapter 1309. Most of Huangqing's sword, 16 Buddhists. Calming disturbance returned to its scabbard, and Huangqing held the sword in a reverse grip. A bloody hole appeared in the young man, who was hit in the chest by the end of the scabbard. Although his bones were not exposed, his heart and lungs had been injured by the sword qi. Even Huangqing, whose qi was as long as a river, needed to breathe in and out several times to calm the crazy and chaotic qi in his body after using this move. All moves in the martial Tao emphasized upon opening acupoints in one go, and they pursued the realm of advancing courageously with the guidance of one's will. But Huangqing's 16 views were extremely strange. After the qi was formed in one go, it forcefully closed the door at the 16 acupoints, causing the torrent of qi to strike the dam 16 times in succession, and it relied on this to achieve momentum. 16 views, one view and one pause. In line with the Buddhist scriptures, one step, one lotus. Although the sword succeeded, Huangqing still had some regrets in his heart. It was said that the king of Baoyong spared no effort to help Su Longxiang, his younger brother, recreate a red talisman armor. Huangqing hoped that the young man who was fighting against him would wear the armor that was said to be as solid as a city. Suddenly, Huangqing, who was known for his heart as still as water in Beimang, laughed at an inappropriate time because the scene in front of him made him feel even more absurd. The young man lowered his head and looked at his chest, then raised his head to stare at Huangqing. He opened his mouth, only to see a stream of green light lingering between his teeth. That was the heterogeneous sword qi that Huangqing had planted in the young man's heart and lungs. Not only did the young man not take the opportunity to spit it out to reduce his injuries, he swallowed the sword qi back. "I'm not full. Do you have more?" Huangqing clenched the famous sword in his hand and smiled. "I don't have anything else, but I have plenty of sword qi." Su Longxiang, whose eyes were glowing with gold, turned his head and looked back. It was unknown whether he was looking at Xianxia or Liangzhou. The young man turned his head and twisted his neck. All the joints in his body made a series of ear-piercing sounds like soybeans exploding. He raised his fists and then stomped down with a loud bang. Huangqing, who was rapidly accumulating power in the dark, narrowed his eyes. He saw qi condensed like rainbows continuously surging out from the young man's body, shattering and dispersing. Huangqing, who was only one step away from Dong Tai in the way of the sword, felt incredulous. Qi dispersing on his own? The young man was already at the threshold of the mysterious finger realm, but now he fell all the way back to the Vajra realm. The old celestial master of Mount Longhu, Zhao Shituan, had once taught this disciple the great dream of the spring and autumn annals. This was no secret in the celestial master residence. Those imperial officials and nobles of the imperial family all mistakenly believed that the old man had lost his mind and acted as an accomplice to a villain, helping Su Rintu's youngest son advance a step further on the martial path. In fact, it was true that Zhao Shituan was thinking for his beloved disciple Su Longxiang out of selfishness. However, no one in the world would be able to guess the true meaning of the dream of spring and autumn. It was not to increase Su Longxiang's strength, but to suppress Yin Sheng in Taoism. if Zhao Shituan did not painstakingly create a box to hide the jade for his disciple, then Su Longxiang would be envied by the heavens. Wasn't Su Fengnian forging the talisman armor for Su Longxiang the same? Previously, the young man seemed like a trapped beast at the end of its rope in Huang Qing's magnificent sword fight. In fact, the talisman armor and the great dream of spring and autumn annals were the true trapped beast. Huang Qing looked down at the calm disturbance as if he was facing a great enemy. Finally, he could deliver a complete sword. Su Longxiang also lowered his head and smiled foolishly. "Brother, I'm going to fight." There was a light snow in Jiangnan. Day after day, Mount Hui was crowded with people. Not to mention a light snow. Even if there was a heavy snow, the road would have been trampled clean by people without the need for the Xianyuan family to sweep the snow. The tourists who crowded shoulder to shoulder were all here to admire the moonless restaurant on the Great Snow Plateau. Although Yinyu Jiang was not qualified to enter, he could still come in high spirits after seeing it from afar. When he went back, he could boast to his friends in Jianghu. Seeing a woman in purple, he dared to boast that he had seen the female chief of Wulin. However, which female hero did not have a set of purple clothes in her bag when she traveled Jianghu? Otherwise, how could she have the face to call herself a fairy? A while ago, the Wulin Assembly was held, and everyone participated in the grand event. Everyone added fuel to the fire, which made the reputation of the purple dress of Mount Hui even higher. In particular, the Tide Listening Pavilion in Beiliang sent so many boxes of martial arts manuals from thousands of miles away. It was no doubt that the most powerful person in the world recognized Xianyuan Qingfeng as the chief. Who dared to say anything? Moreover, the woman was so generous. She wantonly gave away the old manuals on the Great Snow Plateau, as if she was giving out a few copper coins. Many old and wise Jianghu legends smiled brightly. The liveliness of Mount Hui made Mount Longhu even more deserted. In addition, the incense on Mount Wudong in the distance was getting stronger, and Prince Qingsheng, surnamed Wu, was in charge of the affairs of the Taoist sect in the mansion of Taoist Master. If it were not for Mr. White Lotus, Mount Longhu would have been very cold this winter. The weather was not cold, but the heart was cold. Fortunately, all this was good for the old Taoist in the small Taoist temple at the foot of Mount Longhu, who liked peace. Chapter 1310. The old Taoist with the surname Zhao had always been an unreasonable weirdo. He was a direct descendant of the Taoist master's residence and was brimming with talent. He could debate Taoism with Qi Xuanjin, compete with Li Chungang in swordsmanship, and compete with Xianyuan Pan in strength. His talent was clearly a level higher than that of the Dragon Tiger Mountain's leader, Zhao Shi, who had already ascended. However, in order to avoid being an honorable minister, he fled from the mountain and concealed his identity to wander the Jianghu. After returning to the mountain, he didn't live in the Taoist master's residence. Instead, he lived in the dilapidated Taoist temple at the foot of the mountain and waited for death. A few years ago, he risked universal condemnation and accepted Ren Tu's youngest son as his disciple. If not for the fact that Dragon Tiger Mountain's position as the ancestral court of Taoism was still unshakable, everyone in the imperial court would have drowned this muddle-headed old Taoist. Zhao Shituan wandered around the temple that had finally been repaired. He went to the Green Dragon Stream and stared blankly for a while. He seemed to have remembered something and ran to tighten the rope of the bamboo raft. Then, he squatted down and looked at the stream. It was very bleak. After getting up, he shook his robe and returned to the temple. He went to the boys' room and sat by the bed for a while. After sitting for a long time, he still didn't know what to do. He really had nothing to do, so he went to sit by the well. He once lied to his disciple that the well led to Beiliang and was connected to his home. In the end, this idiot would throw hawthorns into the well every time there were hawthorns to pick. He couldn't bear to eat them and gave them to his older brother. As her master, even if he wanted to steal a few to try, it would be absolutely impossible. Zhao Shituan sat by the well and was lost in thought. Of course, the old Taoist didn't like Ren Tu, who almost trampled Dragon Tiger Mountain. But this didn't stop him from liking Ren Tu's two sons. His disciple, Huang Man, or was not much different from the old Taoist master's son in his later years. His impression of His Royal Highness had never been bad. The first time he went to Bailiang Palace, he fought with that cunning little fox. It was very interesting, but he didn't hate her. What he really liked was when a young crown prince came to Mount Longhu and bowed to him solemnly. In this world, there is a great number of aristocratic families, and there was no shortage of daughters of aristocratic families. The more successful a person's life was, the harder it was for them to feel guilty and grateful. They would never be willing to say sorry or thank someone. Compared to casually throwing away 1,000 pieces of gold, the former was much more difficult. Weren't the juniors of the Celestial Master Mansion on the mountain the same? Relying on the height that his parents had earned, he had lived on the mountain since he was young. How could he know how difficult it was to make a living at the foot of the mountain? Little did they know that all the high positions, including that dragon throne, and every ancestor who founded the family business, were all bumpkins without exception. The old Taoist sighed. All of a sudden, the old man's eyelids began to tremble, and his heart trembled violently. The old man's expression changed greatly. He quickly pinched his fingers, and his face became paler and paler. He suddenly got up and sat back down. Zhao Shituan, who was deceiving himself, shouted angrily at the well, "Su Fingyan, if you can't protect Huang Man this time, I'll curse in front of your house for as long as I can live in this life." The old Taoist cursed and laughed inexplicably. In his laughter, there was some sadness of not being able to reach the top in his life and letting down his ancestors' expectations, and also some inexplicable open-mindedness. Zhao Shituan slowly stood up and walked to his house. In the west capital of the southern dynasties, there was a small hidden building with a huge vat in which a flood dragon hibernated. The hermits in the building, who were used to seeing the most bizarre things in the world, were in an uproar. Soon, the old woman and the royal preceptor of Beimang were alerted and rushed to the small building. In the old woman's sight, in the position of the Bailiang territory in the vat, the surface of the water that was as flat as a mirror seemed to have been cut by a sharp weapon for a long time. After the initial shock, the old woman's lips curled into a sneer. Catching 2 fish with 1 hook. The old woman stared at the surface of the water and asked softly, "Other than the sword Qi and the Copperman Grandmaster, can you transfer some experts over? Those who are slightly weaker can also do it." The Imperial Order of Peace shook his head and said regretfully, "Impossible. Hong Jingyan, who is the closest, can't make in time. As for those who are weaker, it's useless even if 10 or 20 of them go. Besides, the Southern Dynasty's border can't be transferred. Most of them are already by the king of the Southern Courtyard." The old woman asked, "Is there a possibility of going for wool and coming home shorn?" The Imperial Order of Peace said indifferently, "It's very difficult for the Copper Man to completely stop Su Fingyan. However, it shouldn't be difficult to delay his footsteps and buy time for Huang Qing to force Su Longxiang to suffer the wrath of heaven. All the Qi refinement warriors of the southern dynasties are ready. When the time comes, they will add fuel to the fire." The old woman nodded. That was enough. The old woman suddenly took a step back, but quickly took that step back. In the vat, something broke the surface of the water. The dragon raises its head. It stared at that line. He saw Jiangnan and snow again. An old Taoist began to climb the mountain and walk towards the celestial master residence. The old man found a yellow-purple Taoist robe that he had not worn for too many years from the bottom of the box. He even combed his hair and beard, causing countless juniors of the celestial master residence to look at him as if they had seen a ghost in broad daylight. The old Taoist walked toward the ancestral hall and bowed to all the portraits of the ancestral masters hanging on the wall. After walking out of the ancestral hall, this old Taoist of the Hope generation of Mount Longhu arrived at the top of the mountain. In the wind and snow, the old man sat cross-legged and laughed softly. It said that there's a knife on the battlefield, and there's no need to be afraid of dying on the back of a horse. There's wine in the pugilistic world, and there's no need to be afraid of dying drunk. I've never dared to kill anyone. I can't even drink enough wine. I've never lived a heroic life. In the end, I'm going to die like this. The old Taoist seemed to be talking to the world as he said loudly, "Enjoy yourself." The old man stretched out his finger and pierced his eyes. Then the yellow-purple Taoist raised his right index finger that was dripping with blood and drew a mark between his eyebrows. It was like opening the heavenly eye. The old man lowered his arms and gently placed them on his knees. He formed a seal and said peacefully, "Huang man, or this is all I can do. I can't learn how to open the heavenly gate. I can't even open the heavenly eye. If I still can't block the heavenly tribulation for you, don't blame me." The world envied longevity, and Taoists cultivated tranquility. At the last moment of his life, the old man remembered his disciples snoring in the Taoist temple at the foot of the mountain a few years ago. It wasn't tranquil at all, but it was what the old man missed the most. At the end of winter in the first year of Xianfu, the purple-gold lotus at the highest point in the pond in the Celestial Master residence had withered. Chapter 13:11. Su Longxiang began to sprint. His speed was much faster than Huang Qing's. The Taoist supernatural power of shrinking the ground into an inch could not be compared at all. In the Taoist classics, there was a way to complement the immortals. Of course, it was a way to fool the villagers. However, Huang Qing's sword qi had already permeated the surroundings and was everywhere. It was somewhat like a weapon made of grass and trees. More importantly, with the help of the mysterious finger realm, which was able to see ahead of time, Huang Qing could accurately capture Su Longxiang's attacking route. Before Su Longxiang collided with him and the calm storm, he would inevitably attack those tiny sword qi that filled the world. This allowed Huang Qing to predict the future and plan before acting. Huang Qing had anticipated that Su Longxiang would circle around and attack him from behind. He didn't turn around. Instead, he pulled his sword out of its sheath by an inch. At the same time, a sword rainbow suddenly exploded 20 feet behind him, splitting the sky. However, the expected scene did not appear. Su Longxiang did not arrive as expected, so Huang Qing's first strike had lost its meaning. What was worse was that Huang Qing had already begun to set up a follow-up attack for the youth to knock away the sword qi green rainbow after making the first move. In a battle of life and death between top martial arts grandmasters, the slightest difference was enough to make a difference of 1,000 miles. As expected, Su Longxiang, who deliberately paused for a moment, finally appeared beside Huang Qing like a ghost and then collided with him. Huang Qing's qi, that was flowing like a waterfall, was forcibly shifted to several major acupoints and flowed like a river. Although the calm storm did not have time to be unsheathed, Huang Qing held the sheath in his hand and swept out. A sword aura drew an arc and split the world in a fan shape with a majestic momentum. In the world of martial arts, only speed was invincible. Su Longxiang did not retreat to avoid the sword aura. Instead, he lowered his head and bent his waist with terrifying speed and continued to rush forward. With a fierce shoulder strike, he directly knocked Huang Qing far away. Su Longxiang ran straight on the ground. Almost instantly, he reached out and grabbed Huang Qing's ankle and pulled down hard. Not only did he pull Huang Qing's body to the ground, but he also directly tore apart Huang Qing's qi that was just about to circulate. Huang Qing crashed into the ground, and Su Longxiang kicked him fiercely. Huang Qing had no choice but to use his arm to block the kick, and his body was kicked into the air again. In the blink of an eye, Su Longxiang, who had leaped up, elbowed him in the chest and sent him back to the ground. The shadow above his head pressed down. Su Longxiang crossed his 10 fingers and clenched them into a fist. If this fist landed squarely on him, not to mention the sword qi that was close to yellow, perhaps even a Moron cauldron that was indestructible would become a broken cauldron. Huang Qing's back hit the ground, facing the rapidly falling Su Longxiang from the sky. The hilt of Calm Wind sword was pressed against the sand, and the scabbard was pointed at the sky, pointing directly at the unforgiving and deranged youth. He left his sword in its scabbard. The scabbard stabbed towards Su Longxiang. The famous sword Calm the Storm was unsheathed for the first time in this way. Su Longxiang's fists smashed onto the scabbard, knocking it to the side. His body only paused for a moment, and then he continued to smash downwards. Huang Qing's left hand gently patted the ground, and his body suddenly spun, driving his right hand to swing out a circle of resplendent, circular sword intent. It was like a bright moon born in a desert of yellow sand. Although it was a hurried sword attack, and the momentum was far from its peak, Calm the Storm was still extremely shocking once it was unleashed. Unfortunately, it was just like the old saying, virtue is 1 foot tall, and the devil is 10 feet tall. Su Longxiang did not weigh the pros and cons at all, and directly smashed the full moon sword intent with his fist. What did it mean to be irresistible? Su Longxiang was it. Huang Qing hurriedly pointed the tip of his sword, and his body floated out more than 100 feet. Su Longxiang's fists smashed into the ground, and a loud explosion went deep into the ground. Huang Qing stood in the distance, holding his sword tightly, and raised his arm to the same height as his shoulder. A trace of blood seeped out of the corner of his mouth. The long sword in his hand not only did not emit sword chi, but also madly absorbed the surrounding green fog like an immortal eating clouds and drinking dew. As the Calm the Storm was completely unsheathed, and especially after it made a whale-like motion, the sword chi that was originally invisible to the naked eye quickly condensed around Huang Qing and Su Longxiang like fireflies in the summer night sky, and flew into the tip of the long sword. Huang Qing's name was that the sword chi was close. What was sword chi close? It was saying that before Huang Qing arrived and his sword was out, the sword chi was already like, the sky is overcast and the sky is about to rain, and the flock of birds is blocking the road, fine and undetectable and densely packed, filling the world. Huang Qing held the sword in one hand and the other hand behind his back. He raised his head to look at the sky where some dark clouds were floating over, and then retracted his gaze to look at the young man who was slowly standing up in the pit. Huang Qing said softly, "People live for a lifetime, and every step they take leaves a trace in the world. It's just that most people's footsteps leave no trace. The wind blows the yellow sand, the snow covers the path, and the water rushes the stone steps. I, Huang Qing, am no exception, but the sword in my hand is different." With every word Huang Qing said, a Calm the Storm was stacked near the long sword in his hand, up, down, left, and right, layer upon layer, motionless like a mountain. Soon, nearly 300 identical Calm the Storm were stacked in front of him. Chapter 13:12. Su Longxiang could no longer see Huang Qing's figure, but he could vaguely hear the voice of the Beimang's #1 swordsman. There have been 2 generations of swordsmen in Jianghu in the past 100 years. Li Changgang is known for his high-spirited spirit. His sword opened the gate of heaven, and he summoned the azure dragon with a wave of his sleeve. Dong Tai is known for his swift sword, and his sharpness is the best in the sword forest. Huang Qing doesn't want to walk on their path. The Calm Storm in his hand only asks for 2 words. Don't move. Between Huang Qing and Su Longxiang, a towering sword mountain appeared. And this sword mountain was still expanding, pushing towards Su Longxiang. Instead of retreating, Su Longxiang advanced. With a single collision, he broke dozens of long swords of different heights that were blocking his way. After he was stopped in his tracks, he pulled with both hands and tore apart dozens of calm disturbance. No matter how Su Longxiang rushed forward and used brute force to break those long swords, in the next moment, there would always be a new sword to replace the original position. The young man who was blocked by the sword mountain and sword wall was obviously angry. He retreated and pulled a distance away from the sword mountain. Only then did he launch a swift and violent charge. With one collision, he smashed no less than 100 calm disturbance swords. His whole body crashed into the sword mountain and sunk into the mountain's belly. But in the next moment, the sword mountain began to grow on its own. Not only did its momentum not weaken, but it also forced the youth to retreat. Even if the youth stepped on the ground and tried to use his shoulders to push the mountain forward, his feet still slid backward step by step. The youth simply used his head to push against the sword wall, and then used his hands to support it. The youth, who was leaning, roared and pushed forward with all his strength. It was like a wooden wall. The whole sword mountain seemed to tremble slightly, buzzing, and the swords hummed like a swarm of mosquitoes. But the sword mountain, whose thickness was stopped and whose height was still overlapping, still pushed forward slowly with its steadily rising momentum. The youth's forehead was already dripping with blood, and his palms were a bloody mess. The boots on his feet were also trampled through. The youth suddenly turned around, opened his arms, and carried the sword mountain with his not broad back. The sword wall finally stopped. In the sky higher than the giant sword mountain, dark clouds covered the sky, and there were faint flashes of lightning and thunder. The young man's pupils gradually shrank until they completely disappeared. Huang Qing said softly, "The birth of you, Su Longxiang, was never a matter of rules. You shouldn't live long in this world. Then I will use the rules to fulfill the rules." Huang Qing drew a circle with the calm disturbance in his hand. It was a simple movement that even a toddler could casually perform, but Huang Qing, whose sword energy was second to none in the world, found it extremely difficult and stagnant. Then, the countless calm storm swords that formed a mountain of swords began to change their formation. Su Longxiang's swords floated in the air around him, behind him, and above his head. It formed a huge semicircle. The tip of each calm the storm sword was pointed at the young man in the middle. Huang Qing looked at the sky from the back of the sword arc. The black clouds were getting thicker and thicker, and the purple lightning that was as thick as a tree was rolling crazily. Huang Qing, whose sword-wielding arm began to tremble, said softly, "Since you seek your own death and are not afraid of attracting the heavenly tribulation, then I will send you on your last journey." This last sword was called Rules. Huang Qing originally wanted to compete with the sword god Dong Tai, and it would be an unprecedented competition of speed in the path of the sword. He didn't expect to use it on Su Longxiang first. Huang Qing suddenly spat out a mouthful of blood, which splashed onto the sword. The calm disturbance fell to the ground. The semicircle sword formation that covered the sky and earth exploded with a boom. Huang Qing's face was filled with shock and confusion. In the distance, the young man stood with his back bent, his arms hanging low. The young man's face couldn't be seen. 7 or 8 thick streams of black energy, like evil dragons, wantonly swam around the young man. At this moment, Huang Qing's clothes fluttered without warning. The scene that he caught a glimpse of was even more horrifying to the sword chi cultivator. Grandmaster Copperman was stabbed in the abdomen by a knife. Just like that, the two people and the knife continued to charge forward together and crashed into a dune. Such a large dune was instantly shattered, and the next dune was still so fragile, like a firecracker in the hands of a child. Huang Qing turned his head and saw that person standing still with a knife in his left hand. Further away, where a dune exploded, Grandmaster Copperman stood up in the sandstorm, and with him there was also the majestic heavenly King Dharma body that was hundreds of feet tall. Could it be that Grandmaster Copperman didn't even have time to call out his Dharma body after that person attacked? That king of Baoyang, Su Fengyan, came just like that? In addition to being shocked, Huang Qing, who caught a glimpse of the strange phenomenon in the sky from the corner of his eye, also breathed a sigh of relief. Even if Su Fengyan came so quickly, it was still too late. The great tribulation had arrived. The 7 heavenly thunders were about to fall, one after another. Even if you were an immortal on earth, so what? There was a rumbling sound. A bolt of purple heavenly thunder smashed towards Su Longxiang. Su Fengyan ignored Grandmaster Copperman and the sword energy approaching, and went straight for the rolling heavenly thunder, swinging his knife. It was exactly the same as the azure dragon sleeve of the sheepskin old man back then. It directly shattered that bolt of heavenly thunder. Huang Qing was dumbfounded. Were these two brothers always so unreasonable when they did things? That was the great thunder that symbolized the heavenly tribulation. Did Su Fengyan really want to take on all 7 heavenly thunders alone? Back then, the immortal Qi Xuanjin withstood the heavenly tribulation on the demon-slaying platform, but he only withstood 6 purple thunders. Su Fengyin stood beside Su Longxiang, reached out and pressed his hand on his brother's head, and said softly, Huang Man, father is gone, but as long as brother is still here, even if the sky falls, it won't be your turn to carry it. Chapter 13:13. Huang Qing believed that with Su Fengyin's strength, it would not be difficult for him to break through a thunderbolt, but he definitely did not believe that Su Fengyin could take the punishment on behalf of others. This was just like in the imperial court, when the Beimang Empress wanted someone to die in anger. Even if you were Toba Bodhisattva with unparalleled martial arts and outstanding military achievements, you could not stop the Empress's decision. This had nothing to do with the level of cultivation. The cycle of heaven had its own rules. However, Huang Qing had no choice but to believe the scene in front of him. This was really beyond the imagination of Beimang's sword aura. After the Bronze Man Grandmaster brought out his majestic heavenly king Dharma body, his Dharma body was towering, overlooking all living things. His head was level with the black clouds, while his body walked near Huang Qing. The knife in his chest pierced through his body, but there was no blood flowing. This deeply hidden banished immortal calmly explained, this person predicted that Su Longxiang would definitely have a day when he would break through the realm, so he had already foreshadowed it. However, I don't know what kind of secret technique he used to transfer Su Longxiang's fate to himself. This kind of technique is reversed and will only attract more punishment from heaven. Huang Qing was enlightened and sighed. Most likely, it was the red armor that saw the light of day again. Otherwise, with Su Longxiang's physique, if he added an armor to increase his battle power, it would be no different from drawing legs on a snake. Originally, I thought it was the Yin Sheng supernatural power of the Taoist ancestral court, Longhu Mountain, which was used to suppress Su Longxiang's advancement. Now it seems that I still underestimated Su Fengyin's scheming. Huang Qing had previously heard that Wudong Mountain's ancestor Lu had the cup emptying the sea technique. If I'm not wrong, that armor is the cup to transfer Su Longxiang's fate. The Bronze Man Grandmaster, whose aura had skyrocketed, thought for a moment and nodded. Most likely. This Grandmaster did not expect that the young man would attack with a knife in his left hand, directly knocking him into this battlefield. This knife was not sloppy, and was mixed with a mysterious technique similar to a nameless Taoist who suppressed the demon Lu Songtao 100 years ago. Even the Bronze Man Grandmaster could only retreat again and again, powerless to resist. If Su Fengyin did not choose to take the initiative to draw the knife instead of killing, he might not even be able to summon the heavenly King Dharma body and summon and die. In a vision of the Bronze Man Grandmaster, that Su Longxiang finally ascended to the celestial realm with the evil dragon's aura of his whole body, Huang Qing might not be a match. His Dharma might not be able to subdue him. Grandmaster Copperman said indifferently, Huang Qing, you withdraw for the time being. The heavenly tribulation is about to descend. There's no need for us to be dragged down and destroyed together. Huang Qing said to Huang, of course, Huang's twos, and Huang to say, how could he not know whether or not the crazed Su Longxiang could withstand the heavenly tribulation? But if Su Longxiang wanted to free up his hands, it would be more than enough to make Huang Qing suffer. Huang Qing lowered his head to look at the famed sword, calmed the storm, and spat out a mouthful of turbid air. A determined smile appeared on his face as he looked forward, clenching his sword and taking a step forward. Sailing against the current. If you don't advance, you will fall back. Perhaps today is the opportunity for Huang Qing to step into the sword immortal realm. The Bronze Man Grandmaster said softly, my intuition tells me that today's matter will be full of twists and turns. It's good that you don't retreat. Help me keep an eye on those two brothers. I want to add some boiling water to the furnace above my head, completely cutting off Su Longxiang's chance of survival. As the Bronze Man Grandmaster beside, Huang Qing slowly raised his hand. The heavenly King Dharma body that stood tall also raised its arms. It suddenly put its palms together, exploding out rings of golden ripples, lingering in the air. Something seemed to be born in the palm of its hand. Huang Qing held his sword in front of him and began to accumulate power. Another strange scene appeared in the distance. The red threads of Su Fengyan's arm that was pressing on Su Longxiang's head swayed, like thousands of slender red snakes spitting out their tongues, crazily absorbing Su Longxiang's 7 to 8 black flood dragons. Those red threads were once Cat Man Han Diaoxi's trump card to kill the heavenly phenomenon with the mysterious finger. Now, Su Fengyan was using it to steal his younger brother's heavenly phenomenon realm. The heavenly thunder was like a huge rock rolling through the black silk-like clouds, its momentum even stronger. The thunder rumbled, purple lightning intertwined, and the clouds in the sky seemed to have countless heavenly court immortals shouting angrily. When an ordinary man was angry, blood would splatter 5 steps away. When the Son of Heaven was angry, millions of corpses would fall. So what if the immortals above the 9 heavens were angry? Su Fengyan retracted his hand and gently pushed the immobile Su Longxiang, pushing his younger brother Huang Man several miles away. Su Fengyan looked at the sky. The purple lightning swam through the clouds, like flood dragons crossing the sea. Su Fengyan held the Baoyang saber in his hand, looked up at the sky, smiled for no reason, and said to himself, "Su Xiao, don't you think that scene looks like a dragon robe?" For the first time, Huang Qing was in awe of one person. It was rumored that Wang Xinji once had the ambition to be the enemy of the world. His grandmaster's bearing far surpassed the other 9 people in the martial arts evaluation. And at this moment, Su Fengyan, facing the heavenly tribulation alone, also had the spirit of a hidden enemy nation. Huang Qing closed his eyes. The memories of his life from when he held and practiced the sword flashed through his mind. This sword chi immortal state of mind was damaged after his rule sword failed to achieve anything, which was equivalent to him failing to achieve anything. But after seeing Su Fengyan standing with his saber, he took the opportunity to touch the threshold of the earth immortal. His shaky realm actually turned out to be a blessing in disguise, steadily climbing up. Huang Qing opened his eyes, his expression solemn. "Just wait for me, Huang Qing, to comprehend a new sword by watching the lightning fall. Then I'll use my newly comprehended sword immortal to toast you, King of Baoyang." Lightning and thunder roared, as if a hole had exploded in the sky. The second purple lightning fell with a loud bang. It did not fall directly on Su Fengyan's head, but landed dozens of meters in front of the young King of Baoyang, then turned and shot toward him. Its momentum was like the charge of 10,000 iron cavalry. Su Fengyan slightly squatted, 2 fingers of his right hand closed together, and the tip of the saber in his left hand pointed directly at the purple lightning. Su Fengyan said in a low voice, river-breaking. The purple lightning crashed toward him like a monstrous flood, and Su Fengyan cut it with his saber. The purple tide split into 2, rushing past Su Fengyan on the left and right, and quickly dissipated between heaven and earth. There seemed to be an immortal in the sky who angrily rebuked, "How dare an ordinary person defy the heavenly Tao?" Then a third, even thicker, rolling thunder hurriedly descended to the mortal world. Su Fengyan stabbed the cold saber into the ground beside him, building up his momentum. He stepped out, raised his hands, and drew a semicircle. Shaking Kunlun with a raise of hand, he forcibly lifted the purple lightning with a palm. The sky, clouds, and purple lightning stepped down together, and the earth stepped down as well. Su Fengyan stood at the bottom of a pit that was dozens of feet deep. In Huang Qing's eyes, the purple lightning dazzled and exploded, scattering on the ground like a broken water tank. When Su Fengyan picked up the Baoyang saber again and walked out of the huge pit, after the 4th, incomparably magnificent purple lightning broke through the bottom layer of the sea of clouds. It suddenly sputtered into millions of purple lightning bolts no thicker than an arm, chaotically stabbing towards Su Fengyan. The net of heaven has a long arm. Enemies on all sides, thunder in all directions. Compared to the latter half of Huang Qing's, using rules to make a square and circle sword, it was more than just a level better. Many purple lightning bolts quickly drilled into the ground, and then quickly and violently exploded, encircling and closing in on Su Fengyan inch by inch. It could really be said to be turning heaven and earth upside down. Su Fengnian silently chanted, 6,000 li. At the crucial moment, when Su Fengnian was facing off against the fourth heavenly lightning, the 100 feet Dharmakaya behind the Bronze Man Grandmaster suddenly opened up with his palms joined together. A lively painting scroll appeared in the palms of his hands. There was a Buddha meditating and chanting sutras, and a mischievous stone nodded. There was a Taoist sitting and discussing the Tao, and a heavenly maiden scattering flowers. There was a scholar holding a book in his hand and a stone tablet in the east. There was a sword immortal riding Qi in the air, playing the sword and singing. There was a divine general riding a horse holding a spear, and his golden armor was resplendent. Although Huang Qing knew that the Bronze Man Grandmaster was a banished immortal, he did not know that this Grandmaster was actually the immortal who had once guarded the gate for the heavenly Tao. The people in the painting were clearly people who had attained the Tao and ascended hundreds of years ago. At this moment, the black tiger that had been anxiously circling away from the battlefield suddenly squatted down. There was a middle-aged Taoist with an elegant appearance standing beside the black tiger with his hands behind his back, looking at the Bronze Man Grandmaster's Dharmakaya with a faint smile. In the 800 years of the world, no one was more immortal than him. Chapter 13:14. Huang Qing tried to comprehend the Earth Fairy sword by observing the thunder, but this strange Taoist appeared out of nowhere and stopped the process of comprehension. What was even stranger was that even though the comprehension was interrupted, it did not hinder the advancement of the realm at all. Even the speed of the sword intent reaching perfection did not decrease, but instead increased. The Taoist crown on the Taoist head was clearly the Wudong Taoist Xiaoyao turban, but he wore the Taoist robe of Mount Longhu and a pair of plain hemp shoes. Without moving his feet, he suddenly appeared beside Huang Qing and stood side by side. However, the sword aura was close to Su Fengnian while the Taoist faced the Copper Man Grandmaster. Huang Qing's heart gave birth to a contradictory thought that even he felt was ridiculous. It was extremely unlikely, but the most likely. This uninvited guest was the immortal who once sat on the demon-slaying platform for 60 years, Qi Xuanjin. He was not the most powerful person in the world, but he was more powerful than the most powerful person in the world. When Huang Qing was young, he met Beimang's Grand Preceptor Yuan Qingshan by chance. He listened to the secrets of Taoism and commented on the level of the Taoist masters. He said that most of the so-called immortals were just Taoists who left home. Only Wudong's sect leader Wang Zhongluo and Mount Longhu's Taoist masters were considered Taoists who lived in the mountains. Although they were in the world, they were free from worldly disturbances and could add spirituality to the mountains and bring blessings to the orthodoxy. Above the two, Mount Longhu had a Taoist named Zhao who lived in seclusion. He stole heaven's secrets and raised an evil dragon. He could be considered a secluded Taoist. For thousands of years, there were many immortals who ascended. Yuan Qingshan only respected two seniors. One was an immortal Taoist who was born several times, and the other was a true Taoist who cultivated to become an immortal but returned from Heaven's Gate, Lu Dongxian. No one doubted that Qi Xuanjin was the reincarnation of Lu Dongxian. Huang Qing also received confirmation from Qilin's Grand Preceptor. As for whether the previous martial arts sect leader Hong Shixiang was also the reincarnation of Lu Dongxian, Huang Qing and Yuan Qingshan did not meet again after that time. As for why Qi Xianxia would appear at this time and place, Huang Qing had some bold guesses. If the rumor that Ancestor Lu had passed through the gate of heaven and returned to the world was true, then it was reasonable for Ancestor Copper Man, the immortal guarding the gate of heaven, to be reduced to a banished immortal. Huang Qing felt somewhat powerless. If Qi Xuanjin were to make a move, even if he could deliver that sword strike, even if Grandmaster Copperman could completely spread out that magnificent picture scroll, would they still be able to succeed? Qi Xuanjin spoke. There was no sound between heaven and earth, but Huang Qing heard every word. Huang Qing, I am a swordsman. Since we have 3 feet of green swords in our hands, how can we bend our backs to serve the powerful? Hearing good words is like gifting gold. Hearing heavy words is like carrying a mountain. Huang Qing could not help but bend his back slightly, and a bitter expression appeared on his face. Bei Meng had been taken in as a favored concubine by His Majesty in Jianghu and had become a force to be reckoned with in the Central Plains. This was the general trend. How could the sword chi of his chess and sword music school contend against it? More importantly, the first time Huang Qing held a sword was in the chess and sword music school. He was greatly indebted to the peace order. Huang Qing slowly straightened his back and calmly said, "Jinren Qi, there are things that I, Huang Qing, can't do, but there are things that I can do." Qi Xuanjin sighed and seemed to be somewhat regretful. In the end, he did not stop Huang Qing from continuing to nurture that sword strike. Grandmaster Copperman stood at the foot of the Heavenly King's Dharmakaya and angrily shouted, "Qi Xuanjin, you are just a wisp of remnant breath. How can you stop me?" The burly old man pretended to be angry, and the Dharmakaya also had the Heavenly King's beard and angry eyes. Qi Xuanjin ignored Grandmaster Copperman's threat and only raised his head to look at the long scroll of celestial beings. The scroll formed a big circle above everyone's head. On this big circle, there were all those amazing people who had attained Tao and ascended to the heavenly gate 700 years ago. Regardless of whether they were from different religions and schools, they were all once the most influential figures in the world. Although they were only the illusions and incarnations of the gods' favored ones, they were able to frighten the land of mortals. It was hard to say whether this was unprecedented, but was destined to be unparalleled in the future. The sky that was originally covered with dark clouds was like adding fuel to the bottom of a cauldron. The boiling water boiled even more, and the several purple thunderbolts that had not yet fallen became more vigorous and thick. Even a purple thunderbolt that had already taken root on the ground suddenly skyrocketed several times. Su Fengyan's 6,000 miles, which had already broken through most of the purple thunderbolts, showed signs of danger that it would be difficult to continue. To attain Tao and immortality, every time a thunderbolt fell from the sky, the people on the ground would only have one breath. There was absolutely no possibility of breathing new life. The magnificent sword aura that was produced by the 6,000-mile sword move had previously stretched out and was imposing. It had already cut through 60 to 70% of the blooming purple thunderbolts in one go. However, after the Grandmaster Copperman's 100 feet Heavenly King Dharma body stirred up the situation, the heaven and earth changed. The furnace boiled and the purple thunderbolts on the ground collided with each other, creating countless lightning sparks that shrouded Su Fengyan. One could only vaguely see that the sword aura that was originally as magnificent as the Guangling River had shrunk into a small stream, flowing around Su Fengyan to resist the purple thunderbolts. The Grandmaster Copperman's voice was as loud as a bell. He sneered and said, "Qi Xuanjin, could it be that you're just bluffing? Why don't you lend a hand to save him?" He took a step forward and his voice became louder. "Qi Xuanjin, are you unable or do you not dare?" Qi Xuanjin's long sleeves fluttered in the wind, and the hair on his temples fluttered gently with the wind. The great spiritual master smiled and said, "You want to ruin my Tao heart with just a gatekeeper?" Qi Xuanjin turned to look at the place where the purple thunderbolts covered the sky and shook his head. "It's only the fourth thunderbolt. Even if you're interfering, there's no need for me to do anything." They had traveled 6,000 miles in the Jianghu together. The journey was long, and the Guangling River was long. However, there was a stream outside Liangzhou City that circled around the city. It was small and close. There was once an old man who lacked front teeth and loved drinking yellow wine. He led a horse across the river and never returned home. Surrounded by the thunderbolts, a person laughed loudly and said, "Old Huang, the wind is urgent. Don't pull." The fourth heavenly thunder collapsed in an instant. However, the fifth thunderbolt, which was turning darker and darker in color, fell instantly. Su Fengyan stretched out his hands. The Overlord carries the cauldron. Purple gas poured out crazily, leaking from his fingers and flowing violently to his head and shoulders. Qi Xuanjin retracted his gaze and restrained his smile. Immortals use the earth as a chessboard, a mountain, a city, and a country as chess pieces, and the fate of the world as the arm that holds the chess pieces. They wantonly place their chess pieces and decide the life and death of mortals as they wish. In my opinion, this is against the great Tao. Against the great Tao, after Qi Xuanjin said those words, the immortal scroll of the heavenly king's Dharma form produced a slight tearing sound. Then it became more and more intense. The scroll shattered bit by bit, and the immortal incarnations on the painting dissipated one by one. Even a crack appeared between the eyebrows of the heavenly king's Dharma form, and golden light shot out in all directions. A bloody scar appeared on the forehead of Grandmaster Copperman, and golden blood flowed all over his face. Qi Xuanjin said coldly, "Today, I'm here to end the feud between you and me in the Heavenly Gate. You won't listen to reason." The great spiritual master put one hand behind his back and pointed with one finger. Grandmaster Copperman's chest seemed to have been struck by lightning. He flew backward and collided with the Dharma body. The 1,000-feet-tall Dharma body also fell on its back. Qi Xuanjin waved his other hand, and Grandmaster Copperman was suddenly lifted up. Then he threw him in a direction thousands of miles away. Qi Xuanjin didn't even look at Grandmaster Copperman, who landed on the Guangling Road in a flash. He sneered and said, "Since you won't listen to my advice, then get lost." Huang Qing, who only wanted to stay still, suddenly moved. He suddenly drew his sword and began to sprint with his sword. He charged straight at Su Fengyan, who was suppressed by the purple lightning. The power of his sword was no less than a bolt of heavenly lightning. Qi Xuanjin didn't stop him. He only sighed. On the way forward, a figure blocked the path of the man and the sword. The newcomer let the sword pass through his chest and punched Huang Qing's head. Huang Qing died on the spot. The corpse with the sword out of his hand fell heavily in the distance. The corpse was bleeding from all 7 orifices. However, this person was determined to use the sword in his hand to suppress the sword qi of Liang Jianghu since he was young. There was no regret or sorrow on his face. The youth with the sword in his chest let out a roar towards the sky. Qi Xuanjin looked at the youth who he should have called brother-in-law in his other life. His eyes were somewhat guilty. He said softly, "The road leads to the sky. Let's go our separate ways. Liu Fu, I'm not as good as you." Just as Huang Qing said, there were things people could do and things they couldn't do in the world. Moreover, Qi Xuanjin was a cultivator in both life and death. Everyone had their own path. Qi Xuanjin could move away some of the obstacles blocking the path, but he couldn't walk it for others. Qi Xuanjin's body was like a cloud fading and the wind blowing. In the end, he turned into ashes. The youth with no pupils and a stiff expression unexpectedly squeezed out a smile for no reason. He looked at the middle-aged Taoist who he had met on the demon execution platform. "Brother-in-law, have a safe journey." Qi Xuanjin smiled knowingly and nodded. A vigorous aura originated from somewhere in the western capital of the Southern Dynasty. It came from the north to the south and stirred up the situation again. Qi Xuanjin was furious. Before it dissipated, he pressed down with one hand. The hibernation vat in the western Capitol building suddenly exploded. The building was filled with water. A dragon came out of the water. Qi Xuanjin, who was about to completely dissipate, had a worried expression. He said regretfully, "For the matter of Zhanlong, there will be a time when my strength will be exhausted." Huang Manor grinned and twisted his neck. The youth who had no strength in his hands pulled out the sword self-taught. He used qi to control the sword and pulled out the calm disturbance. He threw the sword high and then used his mouth to bite the sword hilt. Unknowingly, although it was ridiculous, it was still a form of horizontal sword. The youth first looked at his brother in the distance and finally looked back at Qi Xuanjin. His eyes seemed to say to Qi Xuanjin that he was here, so he could go without worry. After Qi Xuanjin nodded, he looked at the sky. Before he completely disappeared, he seemed to ask the heavens, "Mortals are mortal and live forever. If it is said that mortals suffer because of love, what joy is there in living forever without love?" Su Longxiang began to run towards the north. He lowered his head, bent his waist, bit the sword, and held the sword horizontally. Chapter 13:15. In the southern part of Chuan, the bamboo sea was blue and the sky was blue. It was late at night, but there was no snow. A group of people strolled in the sea like immortals. A man in white with a jade-like face was dressed in white. However, compared to the traveling scholars in the bamboo sea, he had an indescribable aura of the battlefield. The other man, who was slightly older, had a scholarly aura. He was more in line with the style of a pure scholar. Behind the two of them was a graceful woman. She was the prettiest in Chuan. She was dressed in white with large sleeves. Even her embroidered shoes were white with only light green lotus flowers embroidered on them. It was as if she was deliberately matching the clothes of the man in front of her. She held a slender bamboo branch in her hand. The two people in front of her walked leisurely, but not slowly. This made her feel a little powerless. She was slightly panting, but she did not dare to suggest taking a break. She knew that whether it was climbing the mountain or following in the smoke in the future, as long as she stopped, she would never be able to catch up with the stalwart man in front of her. Even if she was Xie, the charming woman who won the Rouge Review consecutively and the mistress of the top sect in Shishu. She could not help but look up at the middle-aged scholar beside the man she admired. Her eyes were filled with sincere respect. She and the latter had the same surname. However, she was from an insignificant side branch of the Xie family. He was from a main branch of the Xie family, one of the top 10 clans in the Central Plains. The Xie family was unfortunately the first to fall in the Spring and Autumn War. At that time, the eldest grandson of the Xie family was called Xie Guining. He was known as the Heavenly Talent. He was skilled in both literature and martial arts. He joined forces with Li Yishan across the river to review the Rouge Review. However, as the cavalry of the Su family continued to go south, Xie Guining suddenly disappeared. The Xie family, who had lost its mainstay in a life and death situation, died out. After Xie Guining, the two new martial arts review sessions were fortunately able to continue. However, the Rouge Review was a failure and could not convince the public. Soon, no one dared to take over. Later, even Su Weisheng of the Shangyin Academy retreated and gave up the idea. Xie Guining was just one of the many chess pieces that the Xie family hurriedly placed on the chessboard when they were in trouble. When this man from the Xie clan, who had disappeared for 20 years, appeared in Western Shu and assisted Chen Jibao, who was the vassal of Western Shu, Xianxia felt as if he had fallen into the clouds. The three of them ascended the stairs. The mountain's topography swirled around. The cliffs were as sharp as swords. When they arrived at the top of the mountain, they gazed into the distance at the locking dragon cliff, a panoramic view of the Sea of Bamboo. Thank you, as the master of the Bamboo Sea, for introducing the story of Suo Long Cliff to the two of them. Pointing at the cliff carvings, he continued, "Legend has it that in ancient times, an ancestral dragon was buried in Shishu, and this dragon's claws, eyes, and pearls were all stripped away by the immortals using great supernatural powers. The dragon pearl in its mouth was embedded in this wall. From then on, Shishu's draconic chi was only enough to transform into a flood dragon, not a dragon. Throughout history, there were only flood dragons and no dragons. In history, there was once a martial artist who divided Shishu and tried to break open Suo Long Cliff, but he soon died suddenly for no reason. For hundreds of years, famous figures of the three sects of Confucianism, Buddhism, and Taoism all liked to inscribe on this wall, each with their own merits. The Immortal Cultivation platform that occupies the most central piece of Feng Shui treasured land was inscribed by the great Feng dynasty's Chao Sheng. At the top, the 7 semi-cursive characters were carved by the Taoist saint, Luan with his sword. The smallest characters among the cliff carvings were facing the heart and facing the Buddha, carved by a nameless monk. Strangely, the character heart and heart was the smallest. Later, a Confucian grandmaster, Wang Yuanshan, climbed the mountain on a snowy night and looked at the characters with a candle. When he was in the mood, he took out his sword and chiseled a little bit. This is the origin of today's Wang Yuanshan painted the dragon's eye on a snowy night, comprehended the Tao and became a saint by looking at the characters. Since then, he had entered the realm of Confucian sage and transcended the mortal world. The middle-aged scholar looked at the cliff carvings of famous scholars that covered the mountain wall, as if he was looking at the face of an old man. Man and mountain, guest and host, both were silent. Xianxia walked to the side of the man in white and asked softly, "General, are there really flood dragons in the world?" King of Shu Chun Jibao said indifferently, "If you see it, then it is. If you don't see it, then it is not." Xianxia was stunned for a moment. If it was a normal person who said such nonsense, she would definitely take it as a pretentious pretense. But how could the villain too, who had always been a man of few words, be so bored? The middle-aged scholar called Xianxia by the sectmaster of the Guanyin sect smiled and said, "Actually, it's not just West Shu that has no dragons. There are also Nanjiao to the south of West Shu, Nanjiang where Zhao Bing, the prince of Yanqi, is at, and the Tuyao ruled by Zhao Sui, the prince of Jiaodong. But flood dragons are everywhere, so it's not surprising. Zhao Huangqiao of Dragon Tiger Mountain stole the fate of West Shu and used the number 1 blessed land of Taoism, Earth Lung Mountain, as a cave to raise a black dragon. Beimang absorbed the fate that Hongjia brought to the north and successfully raised a flood dragon somewhere in Xijing." Xianfeiyu suddenly laughed. Zhao Bing and Nailan Yusi of Nanjiang have been racking their brains over the matter of the dragon and have been playing little tricks. Great Peace City has turned a blind eye to it. Su Xiao and Li Yishan of Baoyang are too lazy to care about the illusory fate. Instead, they are viewed as a great threat by the imperial court. Xia, can you guess the reason behind this? Xia shook her head. Xianfeiyu turned and glanced at the white-robed Chen Jibao. His tone was playful. 20 years ago, Huang Longshi was the instigator of the prophecy of White Python prospering Qin that was widely spread in Great Peace City. I also added fuel to the fire. At the time, the imperial astronomer quickly found evidence from the dusty ancient records. The black dragon of Earth Lung Mountain came because of this. As for the white python robe that the imperial court gave to Su Fengnian, it was also made by me. Speaking of which, no matter how much everyone, including me, played around with the prophecy, it was just copying the wisdom of others. It is not even worthy of carrying shoes for that Huang Sanjia. Saying this, Xianfeiyu suddenly looked to the north. He narrowed his eyes and made a sound of surprise. His left hand shrunk into his sleeve and quickly calculated. Chun Jibao looked to the north almost at the same time. Only the ignorant Xianxia was left. She had heard that after entering celestial phenomenon, one would have a chance of attaining the mysterious heaven's perception. Xianxia had a deep understanding of the 4 realms of first rank. Celestial phenomenon was a threshold. The difference between celestial phenomenon and finger profound was only second to the difference between first and second ranks. The first grade of Taoism enlightened being was the finger mystic. Many talented Qi watchers, such as Mei Yingyi from the Guanyin sect, could also comprehend the finger sword. Many martial artists in the first grade of Vajra realm had 1 or 2 finger mystic secret techniques as their trump card. Celestial phenomenon was much rarer than finger profound. After entering finger profound, it was rare to be able to go further. However, if one entered celestial phenomenon and became an earth immortal, it was a matter of pushing the boat with the current. Xianfeiyu kept calculating with his fingers in his sleeve. He said softly, "Before celestial phenomenon, the depth of qi in a martial artist's body is like a well or a pond. Each has its own depth, but it is still a stagnant water. Once a battle of life and death occurs, the water in the well or the pond will be reduced by a fraction. Then once one enters celestial phenomenon, it will be like the spring god lake connected to the river. It will be a living water with a source. However, once there is a rainstorm, the river will flood and the lake will be implicated. Celestial phenomenon has its advantages and disadvantages. After resonating with heaven and earth, it is like handing over a travel permit to God. The saints of the 3 sects don't dare to kill, because the rules are the most important in the 3 sections. As the saying goes, heaven's law is clear. They don't dare to cross the line. Chen Jibao asked. Has Beimang made a move? Xianxia nodded and said, It is indeed a big movement. What followed was a long silence, and the middle-aged scholar occasionally spoke. Even if he spoke, his words were concise and comprehensive, making it hard to understand. Xianxia heard about sword, aura, banished deity, 7 thunders become 8 thunders, Qi Xianzhu, dragon tiger purple golden lotus, hibernation vat, and so on. During this period, Xianxia noticed that Chen Jibao's gaze shifted from the west to the east, as if he was admiring a shooting star across the sky. However, she followed his line of sight and saw nothing. As the twilight deepened, Xianxia couldn't hide his fatigue. However, he soon became energetic. He stretched out his left hand and flicked his 5 fingers. He said decisively, Great things can be expected. Xianxia looked at the sky and stretched out his arms. He muttered, There are layers of sieves between heaven and earth. It is easy to go up, but hard to go down. The banished deity is a fish that slipped through the net. He is also the bait that the celestial being deliberately left behind. The Xie family retreats in order to advance. I, Xianxia, have retreated again and again. Chen Jibao, I help you absorb the Buddhist fate of the dragon tree, monk, to make up for your loss of leaving Baoyang. Previously, I even helped Zhao Huangqiao raise the Dragon Earth Lung Mountain and let you enter the capital as the Minister of War in exchange for the fate of Taoism that he accumulated. Once Chao Zhangqing dies, you will be able to merge the 3 sects into one. Xianxia's face was pale. She lowered her head and didn't even dare to breathe. Chen Jibao was expressionless. Xianxia retracted his hands into his sleeves and said self-mockingly, The saint once said that those who can live long in heaven and earth can live forever because they do not give birth to themselves. Chen Jibao frowned. Who said that there are flood dragons in western Shu, but no dragons? Xianxia turned around and faced the cliff that was said to be locking the dragon. He shook his sleeves, and a white bowl appeared in front of him. There were small flood dragons swimming in the bowl like fish. The flood dragons jumped out of the bowl like flying fish. They swam towards the cliff and hid within. Xianxia laughed. Qi Xuanjin has broken the hibernation vat. The battle between the dragon and python is imminent. After tonight, the hidden dragon of southern border will still be difficult to achieve, but there is a true dragon in western Shu. This is the last chapter for today. The next chapter, Dragon Slaying, is really difficult to write. Chapter 13:16. The woman was sitting on a sand dune. Her sitting posture was as casual as the bold men at the border. She was so tall that she looked majestic even when she was sitting. She witnessed the spectacular scene of someone fighting against the purple thunder of heaven's tribulation by himself. Even though she was the world's top Qi cultivator guru, she was still shaken. After she followed the man here, she saw the heavenly King Dharma form of the Bronze Man Grandmaster, Huang Qing's sword Qi, and Qi Xuanjin's appearance and eventual disappearance. Regarding the appearance of Qi Xuanjin, she was more aware than anyone else in the world. For cultivators, the word karma was like the common people who were plagued with diseases, which could be cured easily. If Qi Xuanjin, or Ancestor Lu, wanted to continue his cultivation without hindrance, he must have a result, which was to completely settle his grievances with the Ancestor Copper Man, who was a banished immortal. As for Wai Qi Xuanjin, who was born from one Qi, through the Ancestor Copper Man in a Guangling sect, she guessed that it had something to do with Huang Xianxia. If Huang Xianxia could make up for his mistakes, he might be able to return to heaven. Huang Qing's death at the hands of Su Longxiang, who had brazenly ascended, was unexpected, but within reason. In her opinion, Wang Xinji, who had suppressed the Jianghu for 60 years, was an old man with an unreasonable fist. However, Su Longxiang's talent was not inferior in any way. In fact, Su Longxiang was even more unreasonable than the one in the distance. Even if Huang Qing's aptitude, temperament, and strength were among the top martial artists, it was still too early for him to meet Su Longxiang, who was willing to sacrifice himself to attract the heavenly thunder. It would be more likely for him to become a real sword fairy. Due to Qi Xuanjin's interference, The situation did not favor Beimeng. However, it was still difficult to stop the collapse of the Great Tower. The woman in white had a complicated expression. She grabbed 2 handfuls of sand. She hesitated whether she should take action or not. Tantai Pingjing and the 6-jewel bodhisattva of Mount Lantau were now considered to have boarded Bailiang's pirate ship. They each had their own secret desires. The latter hoped to unify the western regions with the help of the Bailiang cavalry, and even to spread their teachings to the central plains without hindrance in the future. Compared to the female Dharmaraja, the Guanyin sect was not so utilitarian. Tantai Pingjing's original intention was nothing more than to mend the sky. The ancestors of the sect had once passed down the 4 words of a prophecy. The sky tilted to the northwest. Later, after her master's painstaking research, she reached the realm of a celestial being. However, she only came up with a vague conclusion that the sky in the northwest broke open and chi flowed backwards into the earth, just like the sea flowed backwards into the rivers. Tantai Pingjing could only take 1 step at a time. If Bailiang was really the main culprit, then the Guanyin sect, as the current ally of Bailiang, would have no choice but to change sides. However, Tantai Pingjing had never been honest with that person about this secret hidden deep in her heart. It was not that he was unwilling, but that he could not. Tantai Pingjing looked into the distance. The 5th heavenly thunder was about to fall. That person had quickly taken a breath of fresh air and was ready to strike. Before this, he had tried to stop Su Longxiang from heading north. However, he was quickly targeted by the heavenly thunder above his head. He had no time to care about anything else and could not do anything else. There were many helpless things in the world. Undoubtedly, it was not that he was unwilling, but that he could not do anything. Even if he had withstood 4 heavenly thunders, he was no exception. Their hearts were linked, and they understood at once. Tantai Pingjing did not receive any reminder, but she already knew what he was thinking. She sighed and no longer hesitated. She raised her arms, and her sleeves were like wings. She pressed her fists together and slowly pulled them apart. Yellow sand sprinkled from between her fingers. The yellow sand sprinkled down, each grain distinct and hovering in the air. The waterfall fell from the sky. Its spray was like pearls, its flow was like silk, and its sound was like a zither. The mysterious scene that appeared in front of her was like a work of God. After all, it only happened in a short distance. It was not spectacular, but it was definitely shocking. The Guanyin sect had 2 secret treasures that allowed this sect to suppress the chi cultivators of the supporting dragon sect in the north. One of them was the land pilgrimage map that almost caused Su Fengyan to fail miserably. The other was the moon well heavenly mirror that was becoming more and more unknown. Both of them targeted the Yu Shio bell spirit between heaven and earth, making it difficult for it to cross the heavenly thunder pool and binding it within the rules. The latter appeared for the first time in hundreds of years. Coincidentally, not long ago, Tantai Pingjing tested Su Longxiang. However, at that time, the Moonwell heavenly mirror was formed by 2 green water droplets falling down in 2 arcs. It was also at that time that someone went against common sense and passed through the Moonwell heavenly mirror. It was like breaking the moon on the sea, causing ripples in the heart of the great Master Tantai, who had cultivated Taoism for almost 100 years. Literature seemed to be happy to see the mountains unequal. However, cultivation was the exact opposite. It was most afraid of ups and downs in one's Taoist heart. Tantai Pingjing wanted to calm down the ripples, and even more so, her Taoist heart. This time, she made an exception to help him. She would treat it as repaying the favor of guiding her in her previous life. After that, no matter how the Battle of Liangmang went, she would not owe him anything. She would do everything according to the rules. Tantai Pingjing sat upright. In front of her was the still waterfall made of yellow sand. To be precise, it was another form of the moon, while heavenly mirror. Her arms suddenly pulled outwards. The heavenly mirror suddenly enlarged and stood upright in front of her. Tantai Pingjing stretched out a finger and gently pushed the mirror surface. The mirror moved horizontally and then disappeared in a flash. More than 300 miles away in the north, the moon, while heavenly mirror that had expanded countless times, slowly appeared. To the south of the mirror, Su Longxiang was running with a sword in his mouth with his head lowered. To the north of the mirror, a huge monster appeared angrily after the hibernating vat was broken by Xian. The young man and the huge monster that should only be embroidered on the dragon robe and python costume should have collided at the place where the mirror appeared. Then there would be an earth-shaking fight. The huge monster came with clouds and rain. Occasionally, a ferocious head, flying long beard, and a pair of golden eyes could be seen in the clouds and mist. When it sensed the aura of the heavenly mirror in front of it, its huge golden eyes showed a trace of human-like sarcasm. After a short pause, it rushed out of the clouds and rain and hit the mirror directly. Su Fengyan, who had his back to Tantai Pengjing, was relieved. He did not turn around, but nodded gently. This subtle action was already the greatest gratitude to this Qi trainer guru for doing her best. Tantai Pengjing looked at the lonely back with purple thunder hanging over his head. Tears blurred her eyes for no reason. There was once a man with white hair standing by the Guangling River. He said that in this life and the next life, he would like to know all the good people in the world, read all the good books in the world, and see all the good mountains and rivers in the world. No matter how good the scenery in the sky was, he would never envy it. After Tantai Pengjing mobilized so many people to take out the important weapon of the sect, she looked a little dejected and sat on the sand, dune in a daze. For Su Fengyan, who was fighting against the heaven's punishment, this was definitely not a measure of timely help. It was one disaster after another. Chapter 13:17. There is a saying in the world that a big python in the mountain would become a flood dragon after entering the river. Finally, it would come to the door and become a dragon. In the 9 kingdoms of spring and autumn, the flames of war were everywhere. Except for West Shu, which had locked up the real dragon since ancient times, the 8 kingdoms each had a real dragon hidden by fate. As the Zhao family of Liang unified the Central Plains, Beimeng, which originally had a flood dragon without a dragon, took the opportunity to raise a real dragon in order to enter the Central Plains and seize the world. Zhao Huangshao, who was stubborn, was also lucky enough to raise a black dragon in the Earth-Lung Mountain. He even set up a sinister plot in the Bailiang Inn in order to swallow the fate of West Chu and harm the Su family of Bailiang. Now Feiyu followed Qin Jibao in a Shu to catch a flood dragon and raise a dragon to help Qin Jibao become a saint. Once he succeeded, not to mention that the fate of Shu would skyrocket, Qin Jibao alone would be enough to compete with Su Fengyan, the so-called number 1 person in the world, and even have a greater chance of winning. There were 3 real dragons in the world, and the target was actually the man in front of her in the end, especially the one from Beimeng, who was about to descend here. Tantai calmly looked at the back and asked softly, "Don't you think you are pitiful?" She took a deep breath and stood up. Finally, her heart was as still as water again. She no longer looked at the man who was destined to die, and turned to walk down the hill. Su Fengyan successively used Li Chungong's one-sleeve green snake, Wudong's old chief Wang, Zhongluo's 2 fingers breaking the river, Beimeng shaking the Kunlun with a rising hand, and old Huang's 9,000 miles sword to destroy the 4 heavenly thunders. These 4 moves were all to counter soldiers with arms and water with an earth weir. Su Fengyan looked up at the 5 heavenly thunders that were constantly accumulating purple gas and white lightning, and remained silent. If the immortals touched the top of the head, it meant that the hair was tied, and the hair was tied to immortality. Then was the heavenly thunders pressing the top of the head meant that life and death were in the hands of heaven? At this moment, Su Fengyan couldn't say anything like man can conquer the heavens. He just couldn't die. This time, Su Fengyan did not passively resist the lightning. Instead, he tapped the ground with the tip of his foot, creating a huge spider web on the yellow sand. He rose from the ground and raised his palm, welcoming the heavenly lightning that had finally descended. Even if the sky were to collapse, he still had to try and see if he could hold it up with one hand. When Su Fengyan's palm came into contact with the majestic purple lightning, It was as if the tip of a needle had come into contact with a heavy hammer. The thick and solid lightning did not flow down along his palm. Instead, it condensed into a flat surface like a mirror, maintaining a falling posture as a whole. Obviously, it did not give Su Fengyan any chance to take advantage of the situation. Su Fengyan's palm was like a mortal holding up his palm to catch the rain. Thunder and lightning splashed in all directions like water droplets. It was a spectacular sight. Su Fengyan's eyes turned red. He stole a lesson from the human cat Han Diaoxi. Then, red threads continuously grew, like thousands of slender red snakes swimming all over his body. The heavenly lightning did not strike Su Fengyan back to the ground. However, falling was inevitable. The purple lightning began to compress from top to bottom. Its momentum seemed to be diminishing, but the weight of the heavenly lightning did not weaken in the slightest. After half an incense stick's worth of time, Su Fengyan, with his arms trembling, was still suspended in the air. However, after the descending heavenly lightning was continuously compressed, it became a narrow surface less than 3 inches thick. Su Fengyan pursed his lips and clenched his teeth. However, blood continued to seep out from between his teeth, filling his mouth with blood. Su Fengyan exhaled the last bit of air left in his body. His slightly bent arm instantly straightened. His palm pushed up, and his body rose 1 zhang. Although the entire purple lightning mirror did not shatter, the center of the mirror was dented by him. Although Tantai Pengjing had already walked down the dune and was moving further and further away from Su Fengyan, she was still certain that the 5th bolt of heavenly lightning was most likely unable to suppress Su Fengyan. Only now did she realize that it was snowing. However, due to the interference of the heavenly tribulation, there was temporarily no snow. She suddenly and quickly turned her head to look. Anger, surprise, and panic intertwined. For the first time, she felt regret. Unexpectedly, she directly turned back to the sand dune and looked up. The situation was extremely serious. She was the one who sent out the Moonwell Sky Mirror. Of course, she knew the result of the collision between Su Longxiang and the giant with scales as big as a basin. The latter did not come into contact with the teenager, but came directly to this place. Then, the latter quickly showed her, a Qi cultivator, what was called unpredictable nature's design. According to the historical records, the heavenly dragon could be both dark and bright, thin and huge. There was once a heavenly dragon in the East Sea. It opened its mouth from the clouds and sucked the sea. The water was like a waterfall into the dragon's mouth. It was extremely spectacular. What Tantai Pengjing saw was similar to the records. After the real dragon that had been dormant in Beimeng for many years passed through the mirror, its power was temporarily restrained by the Moonwell Sky Mirror. It was as small as a snake, floating in the air. However, when it opened its mouth, it quickly swallowed the 5th bolt of heavenly lightning that was about to be broken by Su Fengyan into its stomach. In this way, it suddenly shook its body and shook off the rules of nature imposed on it by the sky mirror. Its body and momentum grew rapidly, and in an instant, it became 200 or 300 feet long as a small dragon. It was not in a hurry to hit Su Fengyan when he was down. Instead, it quietly crept in the air like a python whose belly swelled after a full meal, staring coldly at Su Fengyan. It seemed to be gloating at the show. The 5th bolt of heavenly lightning dissipated. However, in the sky that was covered with dark clouds, the rolling thunder was even louder. There was an additional bolt of purple lightning in the sky. 7 thunders became 8. It was more of a hindrance than a help. Tantai Pengjing's unintentional action was like this, and its evil intention was even more so. The heavenly thunder summoner seemed to be angry because the rules were broken. However, it did not punish the real dragon of Beimeng, but Su Fengyan, who was a helper. The 6th bolt of heavenly lightning did not give Su Fengyan any chance to breathe at all. It came to the human world. This bolt of purple lightning was not as thick as a mountain. Instead, it was extremely thin. Life and death were on the line. It was really a thin line. Su Fengyin almost immediately gave up the decision to retreat. Relying on instinct, he tried to tilt his head back. However, his head barely avoided this bolt of lightning, but his abdomen could not escape. It was instantly penetrated by this bolt of purple lightning. The teenager who was connected to Su Fengyin by blood was originally looking around 300 miles away. He did not know why he could not stop the big snake. When he looked back and saw the bolt of purple lightning that connected heaven and earth, he seemed to realize something and began to run back the way he came. For some reason, the seventh bolt of lightning was much less powerful than the first six. The sound of thunder gradually faded, and the lightning gradually faded. However, the dark clouds in the sky gradually turned purple. Tantai Pingjing did not hear the thunder, but her heart was beating like a drum. She was just an outsider, but she was already so embarrassed. How would that guy deal with it? In the distance, the real dragon that was getting bigger and bigger had a pair of emotionless golden eyes. Its two dragon whiskers were swaying leisurely. Su Fengyin fell back to the ground. The right hand that had withstood the sixth bolt of lightning was still surrounded by lightning and sizzling. He gently pressed his bleeding abdomen with his left hand, barely preventing the injury from worsening. He raised his head and looked at the sky. The emperor of the Great Qin dynasty, the Zhenwu Great Emperor, and the most powerful vassal of the Liang dynasty. His mother was gone. Su Xiao was gone. His eldest sister was gone. His second sister was in a wheelchair. She almost died back then. Guarding the northwest gate for the people of the Central Plains was the best he could do. If he couldn't do it, he wouldn't feel too guilty. But who would want to take away Su Fengyin's younger brother, Huangman? No. At the end of his second tour of Jianghu, the old man with the sheepskin fur coat had broken 2,600 armor at the Guangling River. At that time, he had no way to reason with the king of Guangling, Zhao Yi. It was Su Xiao who did it. At that time, Su Xiao said that he was old and that Su Fengyin would have to reason with others in the future. So today, Su Fengyin would have to reason with God. The seventh bolt of lightning was faintly rotating in the sky above his head. It restrained its heavenly might and did not release it. This allowed the snowflakes that had been falling to the ground only a few miles away to drift over with the wind. The Bailiang saber, stuck in the ground in the distance, was not conspicuous. There was a saber in the snow. Chapter 13:18. Perhaps in the eyes of people from the Central Plains, Su Zhao's doggerel, which began with snowflakes as big as fists, was simply nonsense from the frontier barbarians. However, the snow situation between the two cities of Qingcang and Lin Yao did have the spirit of a snowflake, as big as a banquet. Tantai Pingjing looked at the seventh heavenly thunder in the sky. It was the last pass of Su Zhao's youngest son's natal heavenly tribulation, the tribulation of dragon and elephant. However, due to the disturbance of the true dragon of Beimang, the extremely rare thunder above thunder was born. Tantai Pingjing did not think that Su Fengyin could withstand the seventh heavenly thunder, not to mention the unpredictable eighth heavenly thunder. The great guru also could not hide her pale face. She whispered, "When the qi opens the earth, the sound moves the sky." Master, you used to laugh at yourself for worrying too much. Now you're really going to collapse. The heavenly tribulation sounded very mysterious, but Tantai Pingjing knew its details well. It was much easier for the sages of the three sects to ascend. It was just like the officials in the imperial court. Once they obtained the noble status of the Hanlin Academy, they could easily rise to the center of the palace. There was a saying in the world that thunder, rain, and dew were all heavenly grace. For example, the father and son of Taoist master of Dragon Tiger Mountain ascended on cranes together, and the later master of nation of Beimang, Yuan Qingshan, ascended in the form of a rainbow. These were typical examples of more rain and dew than thunder. However, martial artists like Tuoba Bodhisattva Dong Tai were more like local officials. The route was much more complicated. At the last moment, it was inevitable that the thunder would outweigh the rain and dew. After Ancestor Lu, the person who bore the heaviest heavenly tribulation was the Taoist master with a different surname, Qi Xianzhu, who had the reputation of sitting high in the clouds on the demon-slaying platform. However, only a few people knew that Qi Xianzhu was the reincarnation of Ancestor Lu. No matter what Qi Xianzhu thought at that time, the result was that this immortal in the human world still could not withstand the sixth heavenly thunder after being struck by 5 thunders. Regretfully, he was reincarnated. Originally, the world was looking forward to how many heavenly thunder would Wang Xinji attract in Martial Emperor City. 6 or 7. It was a pity that such an old monster, who was recognized by the world as a match for Lu Dongxian, had died just like that. Now, Su Fengnian had attracted the terrifying vision of 8 thunders above his head. However, this was a once-in-a-lifetime scene. Apart from the powerless Tantai, Ping Jing, and the true dragon who hit him when he was down, there were no other onlookers who could witness it. Behind Tantai Ping Jing, a slightly teasing and mellow voice suddenly came. "This is not like you." Without turning her head, she asked, "Why are you here?" A slovenly middle-aged man came to Tantai Ping Jing's side. He was dressed in coarse linen, wore worn-out boots, and had a face full of stubble. At first glance, it was obvious that he was a single man without a wife to help him tidy up. He was plain-looking and had no wine or sword. If he said that he was a paladin, he would be laughed at by Jianghu people. However, since he was able to talk to the world's top Qi refinement grandmaster, he naturally wouldn't be a nobody. A few years earlier, he and his apprentice had some style when they traveled in Jianghu. For example, they rode a donkey and carried a peach tree. It was not to pretend to be a master, but because of interest. In fact, at his level, even if he walked with a donkey or carried a peach tree on his back, no one in Jianghu dared to be disrespectful to him. In the past 800 years, Jianghu had been unique in Jianghu. There were more than 30 masters who were close to Earth Immortals. There were 1 or 2 sword gods in each generation of Jianghu. Most of them became the first person in the world at that time. However, only the Peach Blossom Sword God, who reached the top of Jianghu at a very young age, was regarded as another champion of Jianghu after Ancestor Lu and Li Chungang. He was said to be close to Tao. Therefore, the name Dong Tai could not be avoided in Jianghu for another 300 years. This middle-aged man, who came from a humble background but had great achievements, smiled and said, "How can I not come after making such a big fuss?" Then Dong Tai said to himself, "I can't figure out how old Monster Wang lost, but I can guess why he lost." At that time, the boy's surname Su said that he was in an out-of-body state to cultivate his spirit. He also had Gao Shulu's celestial being body. He looked like he was on par with me, Toba Bodhisattva, and Chao Chongqing. However, he was qualified to challenge Wang Xinji to a death battle. But as for life and death, it should not have been old Monster Wang who died. Therefore, I guess that at the last moment, old Monster Wang made the same mistake as Gao Shulu. He gave up on Jianghu and wanted to surpass Su Fengnian in the word Tao. Dong Tai nodded to himself and said, "Most likely so. Just like me, after I reach the celestial being realm by luck, if I kill people with my swordsmanship, even if I kill people, I will feel that I have an unfair advantage." Tantai Ping Jing said sarcastically, "Should every number 1 person in the world be conceited?" Dong Tai shook his head and said with a smile, "Conceited? You are so wrong. I should say that if you don't have the spirit of being invincible against the world, you won't be able to become a celestial being." Tantai Ping Jing fell into silence. Dong Tai said softly, "After Li Chungang lent me his sword, he understood his own limitations. It's not that I am arrogant, but my sword has indeed cultivated the sword aura to the extreme and the speed of my sword to the extreme. I, Dong Tai, have cultivated my swordsmanship to the point of almost reaching the Tao, but still not reaching the Tao. However, my swordsmanship is small, but not big enough. Therefore, I rode my sword out to sea for tens of thousands of miles. Senior Tantai, you have lived alone on an island in the sea for a long time, so you should have seen the sea often. You will understand the magnificent concept of burning the sun and spitting out clouds, swallowing the river and washing the moon. Along the way, when I was in the mood, I cut down hundreds of islands with my sword one after another. I also followed the tide and finally comprehended the swordsmanship. At this point, Dong Tai stopped talking and looked at the sky in the distance. Tantai Pingjing sighed and said, "No matter how many bolts of lightning there is a rule. The power of the last bolt of lightning must be the sum of all the previous bolts of lightning." Dong Tai clicked his tongue and said, "The last part of 100 miles is 90 miles? Tantai Pingjing asked, "You don't want to help?" Dong Tai glanced at the real dragon with golden eyes and shook his head. He said in a low voice, "What's there to help? Would I ask Chao Changqing to deal with Wang Xinji? Would Chao Changqing ask Su Fengyan to assassinate the Emperor of Liang? Would Su Fengyan ask for help to kill Empress Murong?" Dong Tai suddenly laughed and said helplessly, "If it's possible, this kid will most likely do it. Why does Wu Su have such a scoundrel as a son?" Tantai Pingjing said indifferently, "He's also Su Zhao's son." Dong Tai sighed and said, "Yes, but the three of them are all stubborn and one-track-minded. Sure enough, they're like family." Tantai Pingjing smiled and said, "If it's not like this, would Dong Tai teach Su Fengyan the flying sword?" Chapter 1319. In fact, Tantai Pingjing was very reluctant to talk to others. However, the seventh heavenly thunder was about to strike down, which made her very agitated. She had to use words to distract herself and calm herself down. "Who will be your final opponent after you comprehend the sword?" Dong Tai thought for a while and said, "Probably Chun Jibao after transcendence. This young man is too tolerant." Tantai Pingjing did not feel strange about this. Siek Guaning, who went to Shu State to assist Chun Jibao, was very shrewd. He hid deeper than Shiwan Bunshi, the emperor of Liang. After almost 20 years of planning, he chose Chun Jibao in order to make the shaky aristocratic families rise again. Because once Chun Jibao was determined to fight for the world, he would definitely need the help of those aristocratic families. In the future, when he unified the country, those forces behind Sieg Guaning would definitely follow him. In fact, Sieg Guaning's enemies were 3 people in succession. Su Shao, who destroyed the foundation of his family, Huang Longshi, who added fuel to the fire, and Zhang Jiulu, who opened the door for the poor. Now one was dead, and the other 2 were about to die. Sieg Guaning had a great chance of winning. Dong Tai said, "Coming." He and Tantai Pingjing almost fell back at the same time. The Beimang dragon also turned around and left, shaking its tail and swaying its whiskers. In the dark purple sky, it was as if a god had pried a mountain and thrown it into the sea. A circle of violent ripples that could be seen by the naked eye appeared in the sky, and then quickly spread out. The earth trembled in resonance with it, and the snow and yellow sand rolled together. A purple thunder-light column slowly penetrated the rippling lake, like a stone pillar smashed into the water. Su Fengyan used qi to control the Baoyang saber. It was not the left-hand saber that once pierced through the Bronze Man Grandmaster's strongest hand, but the saber was held with both hands for the first time. He raised his head and looked at the 7th heavenly thunder. Su Fengyan, whose sleeves seemed to be full of wind and thunder, had a smile at the corner of his mouth. Withstanding the heavenly lightning was a skill. It was a pity that old Huang and the old man in the sheepskin fur coat were not here. Otherwise, one of them would be grinning from ear to ear, revealing his missing front teeth, and the other would probably be picking his ears, squinting his eyes, and pursing his lips. When he was young, he looked forward to the Jianghu. He always thought that if an expert walked the Jianghu without a bit of elegance, how would there be cheers and applause? He didn't expect that the 2 experts he respected the most didn't have the slightest bit of elegance. Tantai Pingjing, who had been retreating for several miles, had been staring at the magnificent battlefield. That was the literal battle between heaven and man. In her line of sight, she only saw a bolt of purple lightning and a flash of white light. The vast purple lightning was then split into 2 by the slender white light, transforming into 2 torrents of purple lightning that flowed onto the ground. The white light rose higher and higher. The purple lightning continued to surge downwards as if there was no end in sight. In Tantai Pingjing's eyes, there seemed to be a huge human character. If the layer of lake was added, it would be an incomplete character. The white light, which was as bright as a comet, was climbing slower and slower. It began to show signs of stagnation. Although it was only 100 feet away from the lake, it was really difficult to go any further. Tantai Pingjing's expression was sorrowful. Human strength is sometimes limited. I can only do my best and wait for God's will. Sailing against the current, if you don't go forward, you will go backward. After the white light completely stopped, the purple lightning didn't stop. The white light was pressed down to the ground 1 foot at a time. Dongtai laughed loudly. Who said that? An ant trying to shake a big tree. How admirable. When the white light fell to the ground, there was a muffled roar from the ground. Su Fengyan, who was holding the saber with both hands, didn't change his grip on the saber in his right hand. His left hand slid along the back of the cold saber. Then, without caring about the sharp edge, his 5 fingers grasped the tip of the saber tightly. The purple lightning under his feet was like a flood. Su Fengyan's arms were badly mangled. He held on. He didn't let go. He didn't abandon the saber. The purple lightning poured down for a whole incense stick. Tantai Pingjing almost couldn't bear to watch. She murmured, after the 7th lightning, there is an 8th lightning. Su Fengyan was bleeding from his 7 orifices. His vision had long been blurred, but in a trance, he seemed to see the tip of the cold saber. A purple-gold lotus bloomed. It was very small, but swaying vigorously. On the ground where the purple flood was flowing, 1, 2, 3 lotus flowers bloomed one after another, like a lotus pond, and the endless purple lightning in the sky finally came to an end. The more it was like this, the more desolate Tantai Pingjing felt. She repeated the sentence again. After the 7th lightning, there is an 8th lightning. Dong Tai stared at the ferocious dragon that was not just watching from the sidelines. It took advantage of the gap between the 7th lightning and the 8th lightning to secretly absorb the purple lightning. Its body had already reached the size of 100 feet. Su Fengyan stood in the torrent. He could only hang his arms and use the Baoyang saber to support his swaying body. The Baimang dragon in the distant sky twitched the corners of its mouth and made a sound like a sneer. However, it quickly widened its golden eyes, revealing a look of confusion and fear. That insignificant ant rose high into the sky and stood opposite it from a distance at the same height as it. At this moment, not only Tantai Pingjing's face was filled with disbelief, but even Dong Tai's eyes widened. Inside the lotus pond, a snow-white python that was 2,000 feet long appeared. Su Fengyan stood on the head of the giant python. The dragon and the python looked at each other. Purple lightning rolled above the heads of the 2 behemoths. Tantai Pingjing closed her eyes. Dong Tai sighed. The final choice is not to withstand the 8th lightning, but Dong Tai didn't say it out loud. Slaying the dragon. The giant python slammed toward the true dragon. The Baimang dragon kept absorbing the purple lightning. But when a dragon python was less than 10 feet away, the true dragon had only grown to 150 feet. The true dragon raised its head and roared at the giant python that was a head taller than it. The giant white python ignored its demonstration. It opened its mouth and bit down on the true dragon's neck. Su Fengyan held the saber with both hands, jumped high, and stabbed down. Su Fengyan stabbed the saber into the true dragon's head. The giant python that was biting the true dragon's neck pulled down at the same time. The man, the dragon, and the python fell together. They fell heavily to the ground. Su Fengyan pressed down with both hands. The cold saber's blade was nailed into the true dragon's head, leaving only the saber handle. The dragon and the python toward each other. The world turned upside down. When the dust settled, the Baimang dragon's head was cut off and rolled to the side. The white python was on its last breath. Su Fengyan held the saber under his armpit. His face was covered in blood. It was unknown whether he was crying or laughing. He reached out his trembling hand and placed it on the head of the fallen white python. At the same time, the 8th bolt of lightning fell from the sky, exploding toward the man and the python. The sword-biting youth who had been running all the way back brazenly crashed into the bolt of lightning. Chapter 13:20. As the purple thunder pierced through the sky like a rainbow, the wind and snow were attracted by it and drifted down. Dong Tai's left shoulder was soon covered with snow, while his right shoulder was much lighter. Dong Tai patted his shoulder and asked curiously, "Is that real dragon so useless?" People say that a mountain is famous if it has an immortal, not because of its height, and a water is famous if it has a dragon. I don't know how powerful a flood dragon is, but I'm sure that any immortal on Earth would be seriously injured after this attack, but they would never die. Since the true dragon that was born after devouring the fortune of countless mortals could create such a huge commotion, it should not be so weak. Is there anything strange about this? Tantai Ping looked calmly at the dragon and python crawling on the ground in the distance with a complicated expression. Her 5 fingers were trembling in her big white sleeves. She shook her head and said, "Dragons can be big or small, and can be dark or bright. The degree of injury depends on the size of its body. The more serious the injury, the smaller its body will be. As for whether it will die or not, it depends on whether it spits out the dragon pearl condensed from its essence and hides in the abyss, waiting for the next reincarnation. Otherwise, even if its head is chopped off, it still has a chance to turn from bright to dark. Now, even if the real dragon of Beimang's head is chopped off, the dragon pearl hasn't been spat out." Deng Tea patted away the falling snow on his shoulder. He simply raised his hand and waved it gently. The flying snow in the sky seemed to have hit a furnace and melted completely in the air a few feet away from him. If it were any other time, Deng Tea would definitely not do such an unnecessary action. It could be seen that after personally witnessing this great battle, even he, the peach blossom sword god, who led the way of the sword, could not remain indifferent. After Deng Tea blocked the annoying drifting snow, he seemed to have realized that he was acting strangely. He laughed softly and said, "What mean you? I am a boar." Tantai Pingjing patiently explained, "There are also 9 levels in Go. It's quite similar when used on the dragon. The last 4 levels are from lowest to highest, concrete, ethereal, meditative, and enigmatic. Previously, the real dragon was restrained by the way of heaven contained in my sex treasure, the moon well heavenly mirror. From enigmatic, it temporarily fell from enigmatic to concrete. Even if it stole 1.5 bolts of heavenly tribulation purple thunder, it only rose to meditation. Because of this, the white python was able to gain the upper hand because of Su Fingyan's help. Otherwise, in an ordinary battle between pythons and dragons, even if it was 1,000 feet long giant python that was the master of a great river, it wouldn't have much of a chance of winning against a baby dragon that was only 100 feet long. At this point, Tantai Pingjing sighed and lamented, "Even a centipede dies but doesn't fall down, let alone a real dragon that is compatible with the way of heaven." Dong Tai turned his head and glanced at the tall lady beside him whose sleeves were as big as the wings of a white phoenix. He said helplessly, "It's getting more and more obscure. Fortunately, I managed to understand the mystery behind it. Sect Master Tantai, are you implying that the real dragon still has the strength to fight? The real dragon is cunning, but that lad is not bad either. He made use of the thunder pool to bloom the purple gold lotus. Now that both sides are injured and no one is external help to rely on, what else can they do other than staring at each other?" Tantai Pingjing did not say anything. Her 10 fingers stretched out from the edge of her sleeves and clenched her sleeves tightly in her palms. Dong Tai muttered to himself, "Everything depends on whether Su Longxiang can withstand the last bolt of heavenly tribulation. If he can't, with Su Fingyan, the real dragon of Beimang is destined to stand out and take the opportunity to hit him when he is down. Moreover, the Qi cultivators of Beimang are not to be trifled with. Other than sending out the real dragon, it's impossible that they don't have a backup plan." Tantai Pingjing asked, "Dong Tai, are you just going to stand by and do nothing? Stand by and do nothing? That's quite appropriate." Dong Tai looked directly at the Qi cultivator grandmaster who led the entire Guanyin sect to the northwest border. He laughed and asked in return, "I don't care what the heavenly tribulation wants, what the Su family brothers want. and even what the real dragon and the Qi cultivators of Beimeng want. Both sides will compete in their skills and leave it to fate. However, if someone wants to take advantage of the situation, they have to ask whether I, Dong Tai, agree or not. Tantai Pingjing's expression was as usual as she asked, "What do you mean?" Dong Tai turned his head and looked at the battlefield in the distance. Both the dragon and the python suffered heavy losses. Taking the unique talisman weapons for themselves is a huge amount of merit. On the battlefield, such a military merit should not be inferior to the merit of a general who destroyed a country, right? Sect Master Tantai, if it were you Qi cultivators, would it be possible for you to ask the heavens for a favor? Tantai Pingjing's expression changed slightly. Dong Tai ignored the subtle change in Tantai Pingjing's expression. He crossed his arms and looked at the high clouds in the sky. He sneered and said, "In the past, Dong Tai only pursued the path of swordsmanship and looked far and wide. However, from now on, I'm really tired of these condescending scheming. They can't cut through generations and generations, and it's chaotic and sloppy. Everyone is treated as a puppet." Dong Tai snorted heavily. The Wu family has buried hundreds of thousands of swords in the sword tomb. Dong Tai has not taken a single sword. Until now, I have not taken a single sword. Tantai Pingjing, who had always stood aloof from worldly affairs, did not back down. For the first time, she went head-to-head with someone. She asked why. "Are you threatening me?" Dong Tai laughed heartily. "Do you think you're worthy?" Tantai Pingjing's chest heaved up and down. It was obvious that she was furious. However, she did not say anything in the end. The lightning pool that bloomed from the purple-gold lotus gradually withered. The snow-white giant python that had broken through to the meditation realm lost its support. Its aura dissipated and it was on the verge of death. After exchanging a glance with Su Fengyan, it slowly closed its eyes. Su Fengyan, who had a saber under his armpit, stood with his back against the giant python's head. He stared at the head of the true dragon that was as tall as a human. "Still playing dead? Can't you act like a true dragon?" The golden eyes of the dragon head that had a deathly, still aura were still lifeless. However, after hearing Su Fengyan's words, the two dragon whiskers swayed leisurely. Su Fengyan saw that it was finally too lazy to hide its strength. He shifted his gaze slightly upwards and looked at the empty sky. He said, "If I'm not wrong, you're waiting for Beimeng's Shijing Qi refinement warrior to give you the finishing touch and rebirth at the cost of more than 100 lives, right?" The eyes of the true dragon were lifeless. However, the two dragon whiskers swayed gracefully like two lotuses in the wind, causing mysterious patterns to appear in the air. Su Fengyan laughed. "It doesn't matter who lives and who dies. Anyway, there's such a Qi refinement warrior who can benefit from the fight between the snipe and the clam. Before you enter the state of mind, she can take out the lunar while heavenly mirror to subdue and suppress you. Are you willing to accept that?" The dragon whiskers swayed, creating ripples and sounds. It spoke solemnly through the mouth of heaven and earth. It was full of sarcasm and contempt. And, after hearing the words, Su Fengyan's heart beat like a drum. The clothes on his chest were torn apart. However, he looked happy. He even had the mood to raise his arm and wipe the bloodstains on his face. He smiled and said, "It's not easy for ants to praise a big country. It's not easy for an ant to shake a tree. Of course, I've heard of this principle. Whether it's a true dragon like you or a group of celestial beings who have been in a high position for a long time, they all look at the world like frogs at the bottom of a well. The life and death of the world are controlled by the fishing rods in your hands. Then, you use the word's longevity as bait to lure them. It's called the cycle of heaven and the wide net of justice." At this point, Su Fengyan, who was still wiping his face, did not completely put down his arm. The cold saber hung diagonally under his armpit. A drop of blood from the specific realm of a true dragon slid down from the tip of the saber. He raised his eyebrows and glanced at the sky. The corners of his mouth twitched. "I don't like to talk much when I fight. I try not to talk if I can. You and I both know the reason why I'm talking so much to you. You're waiting, and I have to slowly recover. After the death battle with Wang Xianji, More than half of the celestial being physique that Gao Shulu gave me was damaged. Its chi kept leaking out. However, I didn't repair it. Instead, I went to Mount Wudong to learn a secret technique. I devoted myself to perfecting the pond in my body. I didn't hesitate to walk with a limp on the path of martial arts. Su Fengnian tilted his head and spat out a mouthful of blood. People were used to describing a person's extreme pain as pain that penetrated the bone marrow or the heart. However, Su Fengnian's chi was shattered from the inside out. The pain was even more exaggerated. It was like an ordinary person who had never practiced martial arts. His skin and bones were being crushed inch by a small hammer, and his tendons and veins were constantly being poked by fine needles. However, his mind was always maintaining a clear thought process. Su Fengnian's expression was somewhat ferocious. It's really painful. I haven't gotten used to it, even after experiencing it a few times. The lightning spear that Duanbua Air brought back was no different from scratching an itch. As he spoke, the mouthful of blood that was about to fall to the ground turned into a red, serpent-like spiritual creature. It scuttled back to Su Fengnian's body and seeped into his skin. Red threads could be seen everywhere on Su Fengnian's exposed skin. They were like snakes flicking their tongues. Su Fengnian, who had recovered some of his strength, held out the Baoyang saber covered in true dragon blood and wiped it on the snow-white python's forehead. The two strands of dragon whiskers shook violently, as if it was angry. Su Fengnian let out a long breath and said softly, "Huang Manor, hold on a little longer." A streak of resplendent white light originated from Shijing and rapidly shot from Beimeng into Liuzhou. Upon closer inspection, it was actually two streams of light twisting together, like two dragons chasing a pearl. Su Fengnian did his best to straighten his back, revealing a rare, serious expression. He held the saber in his left hand and opened his right hand. He lifted the cold saber and slashed it across his palm. He clenched his fist tightly. At this moment, behind Su Fengnian, who was facing the dragon head, the young man, biting his sword and charging forward, forcefully collided with the purple lightning. The lightning that was supposed to strike Su Fengnian's back was intercepted by the young man. After the collision, the thin young man's feet fell to the ground and his body leaned back. The originally straight trajectory of the purple lightning slightly deviated, showing a slight twist. The dazzling purple lightning madly sputtered above the young man's head. The young man was knocked into the ground by the unstoppable purple lightning, his knees sinking deep into the ground. The calm wind ripple in the young man's mouth had cut a gap in the front of the purple lightning, but it was still not enough to break through the purple lightning. The purple light crazily lingered around the long sword. The long sword trembled like the mournful cry of an autumn cicada. Chapter 13:21. How could a famed sword, calm the storm, block this purple lightning? Huang Manor and Su Longxiang's faces were embedded in the purple thunder. On the surface, the eighth bolt of purple lightning was only as thick as a tree. It was not very shocking, only slightly better than the sixth bolt of heavenly lightning that was as thin as a thread. It was even far inferior to the first bolt of lightning that was destroyed by Su Fengnian's azure dragon sleeve. The heavenly thunder was as thick as a water tank. However, Tantai, Pingjing, and Dong Tai, who were watching from the side, knew very well that this purple thunder was enough to peel off hundreds of heavenly thunder, which was as powerful as the sixth heavenly thunder. If Huang Qing could live to see this scene, he would probably die. No matter how unwilling he was, he would be able to die in peace. This was Su Longxiang's real strength after entering the celestial state. With such terrifying strength, any Qi cultivator would feel that it was intolerable. A figure suddenly appeared beside the youth. It was an old man in a yellow and purple Taoist robe. Huang Manor, who was biting the long sword, turned his head with difficulty, allowing the purple thunder to hit his neck. The old Taoist priest closed his eyes and faced the youth. The old and the youth met again after a long separation. The old man grinned. The purple golden lotus that bloomed on the tip of Su Fengnian's blade was the tragic result of the old man's life purple-golden lotus completely withered. The old Taoist priest's figure disappeared at a speed visible to the naked eye. The youth's face was shrouded in purple light. His lips moved slightly, but no sound came out. It was impossible to see whether the youth was crying. The old Taoist priest, whose lower body had disappeared, turned his head and glanced at Su Fengyan. "Su, don't die. It doesn't matter if you bring wine to the grave in the future. Just burn a few more copies of the plain Girl Heart Sutra. Disciple, I just reincarnated first. In the next life, we'll be master and disciple. Also, there's so many hawthorns on the mountain this year. It's a pity that you're not here. Without your help, I can't finish all the hawthorns I picked." The old man turned his head to look at the young man. It was as if he had returned to the dilapidated Taoist temple at the foot of Mount Longhu. As usual, he rambled on and on. Finally, the old man pointed his finger at the sky and said angrily, "Huang Manor, F***CK, that heavenly tribulation." A heavenly master of a generation had passed away just like that. The youth, who had turned his neck to look at the old man, was struck by the heavenly thunder and lowered his head more and more. He tried to raise his drooping arm, wanting to reach out and grab his master to prevent the old man from leaving. But to no avail. The young man took a step forward. Suddenly, his abdomen vibrated like a drum, resonating with the earth and creating circles of ripples. When things are unjust, they cry out. Apart from the circle around the brothers and the dragon python, the ground within a radius of 5 kilometers instantly collapsed. However, at the turning point where Su Longxiang became braver with every setback, the true dragon, who was on the verge of death but didn't die in the specific realm, obtained a powerful new life, like rain after a long drought. After the two intertwined white lights approached the true dragon's head, they suddenly parted ways and then instantly crashed into the true dragon's lifeless eyes. The finishing touch. The true dragon opened its eyes. The true dragon's body, whose head had been separated from its body, propped its 4 dragon claws into the ground. The head that had been cut off by the cold blade swept back to the body, seamlessly and as before. The true dragon flew into the sky and disappeared without a trace. In the next moment, the true dragon's head poked out of the clouds and looked down at the world. Its tail was faintly discernible in the clouds 800 feet away. Tantai Pingjing said in a daze, "It shouldn't be like this, it shouldn't be like this." 1,000 feet, heavenly dragon. Su Fengyan turned a blind eye to this and muttered to himself, "I originally wanted to let you show up when I went to the ancient city of Luoyang." A drop of blood slowly fell from the gap of his fist. When the drop of blood was 3 feet away from the ground, Su Fengyan shouted softly and said in a low voice, "Please, don't." Like a drop of water hitting the quiet surface of the water, the sound was particularly obvious. The heavenly dragon, which was thousands of feet long, spat out a ball of heavenly thunder and rushed to the ground. A burly man appeared in front of Su Fengyan where the blood was dripping. His whole body was overflowing with golden light. Perhaps in the thousands of years of the Central Plains, there were hundreds of emperors and monarchs in the history books, but none of them could be mentioned in the same breath as him. He put one hand behind his back and stretched out the other hand, casually holding up the heavenly thunder. The burly man, who had his back to Su Fengyan, said calmly, "Pass a message to her. Just say, 'I'm guilty.'" Su Fengyan didn't say anything. He turned to face the south and squeezed out a second drop of blood. "Please again." A man who looked like a scholar appeared in front of Su Fengyan with a smile. He nodded and smiled at Su Fengyan. "Don't ask me where I'm from. Think about where I'm going and who I'm going to see. I'm the one who said this to Lu Dongshuan's 6th life. It's also for myself. Won't you regret it after today?" Su Fengyan pointed at his heart. The man smiled knowingly. His hair was white, but it didn't affect his incomparable elegance. He looked at a tall woman in the distance who was covering her mouth and sobbing. He said softly, "Silly big girl." Then, he raised his palm with one hand. A bright moon slowly rose from his palm. The pale-faced Su Fengyan turned to the north and said in a low voice, "Please." A beam of light suddenly descended from a height of tens of thousands of miles. It was a Jinwu Dharmakaya. However, it was different from the majestic scene on the Spring God Lake. This time, the appearance of the Jinwu Dharmakaya was full of an oppressive aura that went against the way of heaven. Above the 9 heavens, countless golden threads like fishing lines drew arcs and fell. They bounced up from the ground and wrapped around the limbs of the Jinwu Dharmakaya. However, even if this kind of appearance went against the way of heaven, not a single fishing line dared to appear near the head of the Jinwu Dharmakaya. However, the extraordinary flower-scattering fairies around the Dharmakaya were torn apart by the fishing lines that intertwined into a net. Dongtai didn't care about Tantai Pingjing's inexplicable loss of composure. His face was full of shock. He smiled bitterly and said, "Wang Xianji, you're a monster, but this guy is a madman." After Tantai Pingjing came back to her senses, she bowed respectfully. She sobbed and lowered her head. "Master, you said that the way of heaven wants people to bow their heads, but the way of heaven wants the turtle in the East Sea and the frog at the bottom of the well to enjoy themselves." "I was wrong, and I understand." When the Jinwu Dharmakaya raised its foot, the battle began. With one hand, the Dharma idol tore off the densely packed golden-yellow fishing lines on its body. With one foot, it broke the purple lightning that was still relentlessly attacking the young Huang man. The purple thunder broke into 2 pieces like a fishing rod. The Dharmakaya that took a step forward held the 2 pieces of purple thunder in its hands. It threw one piece back into the sky and the other toward the Baimang sky dragon. According to the ancient books, the water dragon and the mountain python turned into a flood dragon in 500 years. A flood dragon turned into a true dragon in 1,000 years. After another 1,000 years, it finally became a supreme sky dragon. The Baimang true dragon shouldn't have become a sky dragon so quickly, but the way of heaven was like this. The sky dragon swimming in the clouds was an enemy of the Jinwu Dharmakaya. It was respectful but fearless. It stretched out its claws and pressed on the half of the purple thunder. The dragon's claws were penetrated by the thunder spear. The sky dragon lowered its head and broke through the clouds. It roared toward the ground and spat out another purple thunder from its mouth. Su Fingyan said expressionlessly, "Regardless of whether you are in heaven or earth, you dare to be presumptuous in the north." The Jinwu Dharmakaya opened its mouth slowly at the same time. Its voice was so loud that it echoed between heaven and earth like a great bell. After the Jinwu Dharmakaya spoke, the sky dragon that raised the sea of clouds showed its true body that was thousands of feet tall. It was no longer covered by clouds. However, at the same time, a majestic beam of light fell from the east, west, and south respectively. Heaven and earth shook. Su Fingyan, who seemed to have regained consciousness before death, showed a sickly glow. He turned his head and nodded at the Jinwu Dharmakaya, whose Dharmakaya was almost illusory. The burly man with the aura of an emperor had already casually removed the purple thunder. He smiled and asked, "What are you waiting for?" When the elegant man with the moon in his palm opened his 5 fingers, the moonlight was unparalleled. The full moon turned into rays of light that flowed into the Baoyang saber in Su Fingyan's hand. He smiled and said, "The heavens have no worries. The people have no worries. I have discussed the Tao with Lu Dongxian III 3 times. I feel that it is reasonable to not interfere with each other's business. The reason is the reason. The great Tao is the reason. If it is not in accordance with the great Tao, then it is not reason." As he spoke, the light dissipated. The elegant man's figure began to waver. The great Qin emperor suddenly laughed and appeared at the feet of the Jinwu Dharmakaya. He sat in the north and looked to the south. Before he turned into rays of light and dissipated into the Jinwu Dharmakaya, he shouted, "Get lost!" The 3 majestic beams of light in the east, west, and south actually stagnated and trembled. Not to be outdone, the 3 pillars of light instantly skyrocketed. However, Su Fingyan was already holding the saber with both hands. The Jinwu Dharmakaya also held the saber. The sky dragon's 4 claws pressed down heavily from the sky. Its 2 strands of dragon whiskers trembled violently. It held the dragon pearl in its mouth. The huge pearl was like the scorching sun in the sky. Su Fengyin stepped out and slashed down with his saber. The Jinwu Dharmakaya also stepped forward and slashed down with his saber. A crescent moon was slashed out in the sky. It slashed down on the huge pearl that was hovering in the sky like the sun. This scene was like the collision of the sun and the moon. The scales on the sky dragon's 1,000-feet-long body shook violently. Su Fengyin's saber slashed down, but it stopped halfway as if it was splitting a mountain. A small crack appeared on the saber's blade. The flesh on Su Fengyin's palms that held the saber were ground to pieces. Finally, the white bones touched the saber hilt. The sky dragon that was clawing at the ground with its 4 claws was forced to retreat step by step. It kept roaring. Su Fengyin's body exploded into a scarlet rain of blood. He roared, "I am slaying a sky dragon." The cold saber broke into 2 with a bang. Su Fengyin fell heavily to the ground. High in the sky, the dragon pearl also exploded with a bang. The crescent moon cut the Beimeng sky dragon's head behind the dragon pearl into 2 halves. The earth shook. The huge white python that was far less than the 10,000 feet long sky dragon jumped up. It opened its mouth and swallowed the sky dragon's head and half of its body. After the giant python that had already swallowed half of the sky dragon's head pulled it to the ground, it continued to devour the last half of the dragon's body. Heaven and earth returned to silence. There were no more sky humans or sky dragons. The heavy snow finally fell without restraint. Su Fengyin slayed the dragon. The cold python swallowed the dragon. Chapter 1322. Su Fengyin was sitting cross-legged on the ground, covered in blood. He looked even more battered and exhausted after the snow mixed with his blood. Su Fengyin gasped for breath, each breath seeming like it was tearing apart his internal organs. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw the broken Baoyang blade and wanted to retrieve it. However, he spat out a mouthful of blood as soon as the thought came to mind. At this moment, a snow-white creature with a strange tail slithered out from behind him. It was no more than 3 feet long and had a slender body like a snake. There were 2 horns on its forehead like a flood dragon, 2 whiskers like a carp, and 4 claws. It suddenly moved as fast as lightning and bit the broken blade onto Su Fengyin's leg. It raised its little head and wagged its tail at Su Fengyin as if it was asking for praise. Su Fengyin smiled and extended his hand. The little fellow suddenly turned its body and hovered motionlessly in the air, seemingly pretending not to see anything. Su Fengyin bent his finger and gently tapped on its head. The snake-like creature fell onto Su Fengyin's knee with a thud. First it pretended to be blind, and now it was playing dead. Su Fengyin, his face covered in blood, laughed involuntarily and said, "That bead is already shattered. Even if you swallow it, it'll take at least a few hundred years to completely digest it. It won't be of much benefit to you or me, but Huang Manor needs it to nourish his body and condense his soul. Spit it out obediently, and I'll count to 3. In the end, when Su Fengyin counted to 3, the little fellow lying on his knee twitched on purpose, as if to express that it had died heroically in battle. Su Fengyin twirled its tail with 2 fingers and said helplessly, "As expected of my natal item. It's just like me when it's acting like a rascal. Fine, fine. I promise you that after we return to Liangzhou, you can eat all the koi fish in Tide Hark Lake." The little fellow's head floated up to the same level as its tail and tilted back slightly. Its head and tail joined together to form a cute little circle, just like a lively dragon wall. It hesitated for a moment, then reluctantly opened its mouth and spat out a bead with visible cracks. It was as small as a grain of rice, but it radiated the brilliance of the sun and moon. After spitting out the pearl, the little thing was somewhat dispirited and listless. In a flash, it disappeared into thin air. Su Fengyin held the 2 sections of the cold blade in one hand and pinched the bead with 2 fingers in the other. He stood up with difficulty and turned to walk towards Su Longxian. The young man stood there in a daze, the body of the famed sword storm calming in his mouth, and his hanging arms had dazzling lightning swirling around them. Even Su Fengyin was shocked by his imposing manner. However, This kind of power was like a dynasty that seemed to be at its peak, but was actually surrounded by danger and would collapse at the slightest touch. Su Fengyin didn't approach Su Longxiang, whose qi was extremely chaotic. He loosened his fingers and opened his palm. The broken dragon bead began to spin in his palm. Su Fengyin pushed forward and the bead slid out of his palm. However, it quickly bounced back. If Su Fengyin hadn't turned sideways in a hurry, he would have been hit by the bead. To the martial artists of Jianghu, this bead was an unimaginable tonic. Its effect of nourishing the essence, qi, and spirit was unparalleled. The bead probably felt Su Fengyin's resistance and could only spin around. To the spiritual bead, its choice of Huang Manor as the Dragon Cave was naturally far inferior to Su Fengyin, who was a natural matchmaker. Tantai Pengjing swept to Su Fengyin's side and asked with a complicated expression, "If you don't take what is given by heaven, aren't you afraid of being punished?" Su Fengyin said indifferently, "In order to withstand the sky thunder, Huang Manor sealed his heart acupoint. His 3 souls and 7 spirits are very unstable. Even if he becomes a celestial being, he will be no different from Gao Shulu, who has lost her mind. Tantai Pengjing, if you help me, I won't fuss about your sinister intention of trying to take both dragon and python." Tantai Pengjing's mind was full of thoughts. She didn't agree or refuse. Su Fengyin suddenly smiled mischievously and said, "Then I'm begging you, blockhead. Can you do it? At most, I'll return the moon, well sky mirror to you later." Tantai Pengjing was stunned and looked absent-minded. It was unknown when Deng Tea had appeared beside the two of them. He chuckled softly and said, "You're still flirting at a time like this?" Tantai Pengjing turned her head and looked at the young man who was absorbing the qi of heaven and earth crazily. Her expression became serious. Deng Tea touched a sore spot and joked, "Yo, our sect master Tantai is at least 100 years old, and yet she can still act like a shy little girl. Look, her ears are red." Tantai Pengjing ignored the peach blossom sword god's ridicule and sighed softly. "Even if I help, I'm afraid it's too late. There's only one obsession left to become a celestial being. If I don't cut it, even if Dong Tai takes the sword and I send the pearl, it's meaningless. Su Longxiang still can't return to the human world. Moreover, whether I send the pearl or Dong Tai takes the sword, the price will be very high." Tantai Pengjing raised her hand and waved her sleeve. A breeze rolled up a handful of yellow sand and floated to the young man. The sand didn't turn into powder immediately. Instead, it shot into the lake like an arrow and slowed down bit by bit. However, in the slow process, there was a kind of natural and unreasonable weathering. It was natural because the weathering of sand in the desert was a matter of course. It was unreasonable because, under normal circumstances, it wouldn't take a few years or even dozens of years for the weathering of sand in the desert. This strange phenomenon was like a toddler who had just learned how to walk. After one step, he would become a teenager. After a few more steps, he would reach middle age and old age until he died of old age. Dong Tai clicked his tongue in wonder and said, "This is the way of heaven." Tantai Pengjing said worriedly, "The so-called celestial being realm means to forget about the world without worries. When everyone is awake, I sleep alone. Just like what the saints said, Lizzie travels alone with the wind. How to wake Su Longxiang up is the most difficult part." Dong Tai smiled and said, "It's useless to talk about it. I have a sword." As he spoke, Dong Tai put 2 of his fingers together, raised them up, and then gently chopped down. If it was said that Su Longxiang's surroundings followed the rules of the heavenly Tao and formed a small kiliocosm of its own, and this part of the world was in chaos like a chicken egg, then Deng Tea's sword momentum was about to split open the world and split the chicken egg in half. Dong Tai laughed loudly and said, "After splitting the mountain, I'll use another sword. Let's call it paving the road." The finger's sword cut the mountain, and the mountain was about to close. Dong Tai then released streaks of sword aura between the mountains, forcibly blocking the gathering of the way of heaven. Dong Tai rode the wind and flew forward. After leaping over Su Longxiang's head, the calm wind ripple with purple lightning appeared in his hand. After the peach blossom sword deity went straight through the thunder pool of heaven, his figure went further and further. He knocked his fingers and flicked his sword. He laughed and said, splitting the mountain and paving the road, 2 swords in exchange for a good sword. We don't owe each other anything. Chapter 1323. Almost as soon as Dong Tai took the first step, Tantai Pingjing took the bead from Su Fingyin and followed closely behind Dong Tai. The path was as narrow as a sword's length. Tantai Pingjing, dressed in white, followed Dong Tai and flew over Su Longxiang's head like a white phoenix. At the same time, she shook her wrist and slapped the bead into the young man's chest. When Tantai Pingjing landed in the distance, she felt as if she had walked through the gate of hell. She still had lingering fear, as if her soul was trembling. The feeling was even stronger than that of surviving a life and death battle. It was because she was a top chi trainer in the world and someone who knew the strictness of the natural law best that she felt the lingering fear. The reason was simple. If Zhang Jilu, the Grand Secretary of the Imperial Court, was traveling incognito in Tian City, ordinary people could ignore him if they didn't know his identity. However, if an official working in the 6 ministries passed by the blue-eyed man, he would inevitably feel as if he was walking on thin ice. Dong Tai and Tantai Pingjing passed through the thunder pool one after the other. It happened in the blink of an eye. She turned her head and showed a shocked expression. The 2 mountains merged, but Su Fingyin was standing beside Su Longxiang. Tantai Pingjing knew that Su Fingyin went there with the help of the Yujing Sky Mirror, and he could also leave with the help of the Yujing Sky Mirror. However, the key was that in the middle of this trip, Su Fingyin was not going there to enjoy the scenery, but to wake up his younger brother Su Longxiang. Tantai Pingjing could be 10 years older or even a month later. Perhaps in less than half an hour, she would see a hunchbacked old man with white hair instead of the young king of Baoyang who was only in his 20s. Tantai Pingjing bit her lips. She could understand why Su Fingyin gave the bead to Su Longxiang. It was common for brothers to respect each other in the world. Although it was rare in the families of emperors, generals, and ministers, she was not surprised that Su Fingyin was willing to give the good stuff to Su Longxiang. It could even be said that Tantai Pingjing also thought that it was reasonable that Su Fingyin was willing to resist the heaven's punishment for his younger brother. After all, at that time, Su Fingyin still had the strength to fight. However, now the Qi pond in Su Fingyin's body had dried up. What else could he do other than die? Tantai Pingjing could not suppress her anger. She suddenly opened her mouth slightly. Su Fingyin seemed to have only said one sentence to his younger brother, and then quickly retreated to the original place. He staggered out of the shaky Yujing Sky Mirror with a bright smile on his face. Tantai Pingjing did not think that one sentence could wake up Su Longxiang. One sentence could break the heaven's law. However, the scene that followed made her believe that rules and reason really didn't work on this pair of brothers. The youth opened his eyes, turned, and ran to Su Fingyin. He lowered his head and crouched down, gently carrying the exhausted Su Fingyin. There was a sound of horse hooves in the distance. It should be the 2,000 dragon elephant army that arrived late. Of course, even if this cavalry army arrived early, they would only be caught in the crossfire without any power to retaliate. Tantai Pingjing came to the side of the 2 brothers. She glanced at Su Fingyin's hands on his younger brother's neck. His palms seemed to have been cut clean by a knife, revealing the shocking white bones. She softly reminded, Wang Xinji's disciple, Lu Huang, is here. In the distance, in the wind and snow, there was a wooden man with an ancient sword Bodhisattva barbarian at his waist. The exhausted Su Fingyin had an indifferent face. He smiled and said hoarsely, Lu Huang is here to watch the show. If he really wants to take revenge, he will honestly wait for me to recover my strength. If he is willing to kill a weak enemy, then Lu Huang is not Wang Xinji's disciple. Tantai Pingjing sneered. Lu Huang can wait for that day. Su Fingyin glared at her and said weakly, How can you talk to your master like that? Tantai Pingjing seemed to have been touched. A trace of indistinct murderous intent appeared. Su Fingyin knocked Huang Manor's shoulder with his chin, indicating that he should ignore this woman. Tantai Pingjing's meaning was to ask whether Su Fengyan could return to the peak. This peak obviously could not be the time when he fought Wang Xinji, nor could it be the time when he was invited 3 times. It was before he withstood the last Sky Thunder. At that time, although Su Fengyan did not have Gao Shulu's physique, he had abundant spirit. Su Fengyan did not want to answer this question directly because he did not have the confidence in his heart. After this battle, he completely separated himself from his previous life. The disadvantage was that he did not have any trump cards. The advantage was that Bailiang would not have any twists and turns because of Su Fengyan's luck. On the other hand, Su Fengyan had a life item and was already closely related to the fate of Bailiang. Once Bailiang was broken, he would certainly die. In this regard, Su Fengyan did not worry about personal gains and losses. He could save Wang Manor and let his younger brother have no worries. Today's big deal was a profit. Doing business with God without any pretense of cordiality, not only did he not lose everything, but he also made a little profit. This was a technical job that made Su Fengyan feel proud of himself. After the battle, Su Fengyan was a little sleepy and his eyelids were fighting. But before he fell asleep, Su Fengyan still had some things to say to his younger brother, so he spoke his mind in a long-winded manner. Huang Manor, I don't want to say nonsense like your master didn't die for you. The old heavenly master sacrificed his life for you. You feel guilty, but I feel the same way. When old Huang left Bailiang for Martial Emperor City, I also thought that because old Huang was a sword fanatic, he went to the Eastern Sea to prove the 3 words, 9 swords Huang. But in fact, I know very well that old Huang went for me. There was no other reason. Perhaps he wanted to tell me that if Su Fengyan did not have Bailiang in the future, there was still the martial world to think about. Perhaps old Huang felt that the first time I walked the martial world with him, he did not give me any face and wanted to leave in glory again. Perhaps, who knows? In short, old Huang left. Just like the old heavenly master, he couldn't escape death in his lifetime. But for us, he died a long time ago. You wanted to kill a few more experts for me. I understand your thoughts, but you didn't do it well. More accurately, you did it in a complete mess. I rushed here to fight this and that, and I really didn't have time to beat you up. Otherwise, I would have already beaten your butt. I want to beat you up now, but I really don't have the strength. When I was young, I clearly did something wrong, but I still like to argue with Su Xiao. I felt that it was a very satisfying thing, and I was afraid that our father would scold or beat me. After the incident, I always felt that I was a man. But when I grew up, I realized that it was wrong. Huang Manor, don't learn from me. Su Fengyan's nagging voice was getting softer and softer. Su Longxiang didn't interrupt from beginning to end and carefully carried his older brother on his back. When he was young, he had already revealed his innate divine strength. He would often carry his older brother up and down Mount Qingliang. Occasionally, his older brother would even pull a kite in his hand. The big sister, who loved to join the fun, would run behind them and shout happily, "Fly, fly, fly." Huang Manor said softly, "Big brother, don't sleep." Chapter 13:24. A large group of people were kneeling in the corridor of a secluded building located in the corner of Shijing's inner court. Not far from the building, there were many corpses lying on the ground. They were all Beimang's most valuable qi cultivators. An old woman in a black robe and a white fur coat stood under the eaves. Her hands were folded in front of her chest, and her sleeves were rolled up like bat wings. This old woman, who made Beimang men grovel under her skirt, rarely got angry, but today her expression was very ugly. First, the Dowd Sect's immortal Nan Ming, who was good at divination, told her in a trembling voice that the chess and sword music school's bronze ancestor was unknown, and that the sword chi was close to yellow and blue. Then, the hibernating cauldron, which was a national treasure, was smashed by an unknown land immortal, and the true dragon that had been raised for more than 20 years broke out of the cauldron. That was not all. Under the rolling thunder, the true dragon that had taken advantage of the situation did not gain any advantage, so she decisively decided to help it. This was because she had always dared to gamble with the heavens. It was fine if she did not gamble, but if she did, she would gamble big. Last time, she won a lot of money, and the entire Beimang dynasty followed her surname. But this time, the immortal Nanming told her that she had lost, and the 100 corpses outside the building were proof. In fact, her anger was not because she had lost a battle in Liuzhou of Baoyang that did not affect the overall situation. It was not even because of the death of the true dragon, and definitely not because of those Qi cultivators who did not care about the world. What really made the old woman unable to accept was a small matter that could not be told to anyone. When she was at the lowest point of her life, she lost to an unknown brute of Liaodong. When she was at the peak of her power, she lost to his son. The peace warrant stood beside the old woman, and the old man was the only Beimang official who still dared to stand. She finally spoke, passed down the decree to Dongjua that he is allowed to mobilize all the troops at the border without permission. Regardless of whether it is a general or a military officer, all must listen to him. Those who disobey will be executed by Dongjua first and report later. Pass down the decree to Tooba Bodhisattva to lead the troops to the south and head straight for Liuzhou. Pass down the order to Li Mixi. Prepare for the carp crossing the river. Pass down the decree to Huang Songpu. Order him to rise and lead the troops to Xijing. Imperial edicts came out of her mouth one after another. She was, after all, an old woman in her twilight years, so it was inevitable that her energy was lacking. For a moment, it was difficult for her to conceal her old weariness. However, today, she did not allow herself to slack off for even a moment. She pulled out her hand from her wide sleeves and abruptly tore off the old fox fur coat on her body, throwing it into the snow outside the steps. Then she strode away, not looking at the old thing that was constantly accumulating snow again. Great Peace City never lacked excitement, but many of them were hard to join. Once they encountered something they could join, no one was willing to fall behind. Right now, there was a rumor that the new Right Chancellor of the Imperial College, who would replace Jin Sanlang, was going to teach martial arts. Whether it was an armchair strategist or he really had a belly full of strategies, the truth would be known after a walk. The majority of people were there to see a joke. The current assistant minister of the Ministry of Rights, Jean Lanting, had a good reputation in the Imperial College. Not only had he obtained many gifts from the Imperial Court for the Imperial College, he had also founded the most famous poetry club in the capital. Together with the 7 scholars in the club, they were known as the 8 talents of Great Peace City. They included the top 3 in the new exam, the top scholar Li Jifu, the second-place Gao Tingshu, and the second-place Wu Xianxia. Among them, Gao Tingshu, who had the reputation of being a poet ghost, wrote the popular Drunken 8 Immortals at a banquet, instantly causing the 8 people present to become famous overnight. The 8 talents of Great Peace City came from different backgrounds, like the difference between heaven and earth, but they often sang poems and showed the elegance of scholars. Those with discerning eyes could see that although the head of the 8 talents, Jin Sanlang, was not very popular among the central cabinet officials, the imposing manner that he had slowly gathered could not be underestimated. A provincial pawn called Sun Yin had made an exception to fill the empty position of the Right Chancellor, which was especially abrupt and rude. What was even stranger was that this person did not have any solid backing. Therefore, Sun Yin's rampage, entering the imperial court with the local official Su Gong as the assistant minister of the Ministry of War, and Chen Wang's meteoric rise, became the 3 surprises of the capital's officialdom at the end of the first year of the auspicious talisman, extremely eye-catching. Furthermore, Su Gong, who had the status of Lady Su, had previously had the foundation of being a dragon general. Chen Wang, Chun Xiaobao, had the double foundation of being the crown prince's attendant lecturer and the meritorious service examiner. In contrast, Sun Yin felt even more strange. Moreover, Sun Yin was extremely arrogant. He publicly announced that the content of his lecture would be a great martial arts demonstration. He would be the attacking party and would have 2 forces in his hands: Beimang's millions of Iron Horse cavalry and the remnants of West Chu's restoration of the Guangling Road. Everyone who listened to the lecture belonged to the defending camp. There was the army led by Lu Xianxiang, the commander of the Southern Expedition, who was newly conferred the title of General Piao by the imperial court. There was also the Liao defense line led by Gu Jiantang, the vassal state's forces that participated in the quelling of difficulties. Finally, there was also the Bailiang cavalry that had been deliberately forgotten by the Central Plains for many years. This could be said to be an unprecedented battle of words. Just the number of Imperial College students who participated in the lecture amounted to more than 6,000 people. In fact, most people were destined to not be able to hear what the new chancellor was saying. However, there was no need to worry. Very soon, there would be people from the front to the back to pass on the message, layer by layer, like waves after waves. The students who rushed to occupy the seats early all sat on the ground. Those who came later could only stand. Those who came later had to stand on their tiptoes and stretch their necks. After that, they had to stand on benches and chairs. However, in the best position not far from Sun Quangtu at the front, there were many simple but thick praying mats placed there. There were about 30 of them. Those who were qualified to sit on the praying mats were really honorable. Among them, the leader was the first prime minister of Liang Imperial Court in 30 years, the head of the secretariat, Xianxia. On the left side of the head of the secretariat was Huan Wen Tantanon, who was in charge of the province. On the right side was the frustrated person who failed to succeed Baigua as the Minister of Rights in the change of power, Yao Baifeng, a master of science who continued to be in charge of the Imperial College, and Baigua, who was transferred from the Minister of Rights to the Ministry of Revenue. There was also a certain member of the imperial family who was particularly proud of his success in the middle of winter. Yes, it was the Prince of Chai who swaggered into the capital with the help of his good son-in-law. This long martial arts lecture went on from noon to dusk. There was no sign of it ending, but no one left. In fact, there were even a lot of new faces coming in. There was a sea of people. During this time, the Crown Prince, who was in charge of the country, quietly joined in with the Crown Princess. Soon, the old minister of the Ministry of Personnel and the new assistant minister of the Secretariat, Zhao Yuling, broke through the crowd without hiding his identity and joined in. He sat on a newly added praying mat. Compared to Zhao Yuling, the Prime Minister, Yin Mao Chun, who had been promoted from the Chancellor of the Hamlin Academy to the Minister of Personnel, was much more reserved and low-key. He arrived at the Imperial College with a light carriage and stood side by side with Chen Wang, who was young enough to make one's hair stand on end. He couldn't see or hear anything. However, these two could be called important officials of the central government. One was a second-rank official of the external court, and the other was a third-rank official. They stood there for a full 4 hours. Because they stood at the very back and didn't have any retinue to protect them. They also didn't wear purple official robes. On their left and right were ordinary students of the Imperial College who studied hard. No one knew that there were two important officials of the court standing right in front of them. They only thought of them as ordinary Confucians of Great Peace City. The Imperial College continued to be noisy and lively. It became the hot topic of discussion in the capital. The restaurants and tea houses outside the Imperial College were even more crowded, waiting for the results of the debate to be revealed. There were constantly scholars running onto the street to report the real-time situation. Chapter 1325. However, in the almost empty Hamlin Academy, two travel-worn old faces appeared. One was Mr. Yuan, who had been depressed for many years, and the other made the official on duty almost roll his eyes. When the two teachers of the Song family dominated the literary world, the official was praised by everyone, both in front of and behind him, for being a young phoenix of the Song family. Now, not only were the two teachers dead, there was no glory to speak of. Who did not know that the Song family, which had been endlessly glorious, certainly had no chance to make a comeback? A featherless young phoenix was worse than a chicken. Who would be willing to treat Song Kelly, who was demoted to a poor county magistrate, as a scallion? If such a cold stove could still make a comeback, I would eat all the ashes of the stove. This 7th-grade Qinglu official did not put on too much airs. After all, Yuan Piao, Yuan Huangmin, who had gone out to visit his relatives, still had a position in the Hamlin Academy. They would see each other frequently. There was no need for him to lose the merit that he had accumulated over many years for Song Kelly. Yuan Pu, or Yuan Bunshi, the master of the Emperor of Liang, sat down in his room. His half-inch-long tongue was naturally unclear. Don't you want to go to the Imperial College? That's the place where your Song family rose. Song Kelly, who had traveled with Mr. Yuan, shook his head and said calmly, "It's useless to revisit the old place." Yuan Bunchi was silent for a moment and said slowly, "Chun Wang, Sun Yin, will be your political enemy from now on. They won't lose to you in terms of achievements and knowledge, but they took the initiative to come out in the open. This is your biggest disadvantage, but also your only advantage." Song Kelly nodded. In the dusk, in the yamen of the Zhao family, which was not far from the Hamlin Academy, a tall old man with purple beard and blue eyes walked to the Imperial Street alone. He stood in the middle of the most magnificent and wide street in the world, with his back to the gate of the Imperial City, and looked at the sky in the south. The old man remembered a chance encounter when he was young. At that time, that man was also very young, and at least he wasn't crippled. At that time, he was deliberately forced to stay in the Hamlin Academy by his master, and his best friend was already in charge of the Ministry of War. The other Xianxia the same year also had a bright future. It was a time when the literati were overwhelmed by the military. 10 years ago, literati were like performers who could only answer to the generals in the imperial court. If it was a few decades ago, the dynasty was full of warring towns, and people were divided into territories. Literati couldn't even answer to the generals. If they didn't flatter the right people, or if they flattered well but were misunderstood by the generals, they might be beheaded. In such a dynasty, not to mention the orthodox Great Chu of the Central Plains, even Dongyue, who was willing to be slaves to the Great Chu, was qualified to laugh at the northern neighbor as a group of uncivilized barbarians, not to mention the orthodox Great Chu of the Central Plains. Because of his purple beard and blue eyes, even the barbarians of Liang in the eyes of the Central Plains people had to mock and ridicule him. It was a gloomy day in late autumn when a certain scholar's life was finally getting better. He went to the Ministry of War to ask his friend to open the back door and borrow a map of the two vast territories. When he got the map as he wished, it was raining heavily. He didn't dare to let the rain wet the map, so he had to take shelter under the eaves of the yamen. But the heavy rain didn't stop, so he could only wait patiently. Then he saw a young man arrive with an umbrella and a small wooden chest in his hand. He didn't like this person because he had a strong warrior's aura. Judging from his attire, he was probably a military officer with a surplus rank who the imperial court turned a blind eye to. The Ministry of War's yamen courtyard was deep and had several entrances. He guessed that this person would be stopped at the first courtyard. As expected, the guy was stopped at the first courtyard, so he didn't pay much attention to him. But when he was waiting for the rain, he occasionally turned his head and glanced at him. He saw the ordinary-looking young warrior standing alone in the heavy rain, his umbrella by his feet. There was also the open chest, shining with white light, which should be silver. But this little bit of silver was nothing in the eyes of the old master of the Ministry of War, whose appetite could swallow the sky. It was just a matter of drinking with 3 or 4 colleagues. He vaguely heard the words of the young man who was refused entry, which were repeated over and over again. "I, Su Shao, promise you with my head. Just give me 1,000 soldiers a month. Just 1 month, the next time I visit you, I will have someone bring 10 chests of gold." The rain continued to fall. He heard the young man in the courtyard speak loudly and compromise constantly. From 1,000 soldiers, it was reduced to 800, then to 500. And the chest also increased from 10 chests to 20 chests, then to 30 chests. When the rain finally lessened, perhaps because the old men of the Ministry of War who were leisurely drinking tea and chatting felt that it was about time to go home, there were groups of 2 or 3 important people who walked out of the courtyard one after another. They chatted and laughed, not looking sideways as they brushed past the young man. Later, a manager finally took a look, but not at the young man who was asking for soldiers and horses. Instead, he looked at the silver soaked in rainwater in the chest. He let out a snort of laughter and seemed to say something sarcastic, but at the time, he was hiding from the crowd at the door and did not hear it clearly. He thought that since the rain hadn't completely stopped, he might as well wait for his friends in the courtyard to finish their business. Perhaps it was true that there was always a way out. He saw an old man wearing a tiger and leopard patch walking out of the courtyard with his hands behind his back. Beside him was an official from the Ministry of War who was eagerly holding an umbrella. The umbrella was tilted towards the old man. When the old man passed by the young man, he stopped and kicked the chest with his foot. Because the rain was much lighter, he could clearly hear the conversation between the two of them. "Where are you from?" "This general is Su Xiao, from Jianzhou of Liaodong." "You lost the battle?" "Yes. But this general has 700 brothers and defeated 2 of Hong Chengqiu's main battalions, one of which was cavalry." "What main force? What cavalry?" "It's all nonsense. A loss is a loss. This official will only ask you one thing. This official will treat it as a small gamble for fun and give you some men. But can you really earn back your losses?" "Yes." "Well, fine. This official will give you a tiger tally. You can go to the right guard and transfer 300 men. As for the chests, by the way, how many did you say you carried?" "Sir, it's 30. 50. "Oh, you're quite smart. Fine. This official will give you 300 men. Remember to bring the chests directly to my residence later." "Thank you, sir. This general will live up to your kindness." "Oh, I almost forgot. What's your name?" "This official doesn't want to not know who to look for when I want to kill someone." "Su Xiao of the Jianzhou Battalion." Finally, the big boss from the Ministry of War walked out of the Yamen gate. Beside him was the official who held the umbrella for him with one hand and carried the chest with the other. He saw the young general standing in the rain with his fists clenched. His back was straight, but there was an extra tiger tally in his hand. The young man put the tiger tally into his pocket, bent down to pick up the umbrella, and turned to walk to the gate. He had already looked away when the young general picked up the umbrella. He looked down and faced the south. The latter didn't rush to open the umbrella. Instead, he stopped under the eaves of the gate and seemed to see him. He took the initiative to ask with a smile, "Are you still waiting for the rain to stop?" He stared blankly for a moment, then nodded. Then that fellow grinned at him and threw the umbrella over without giving him a chance to refuse. He walked down the steps in large strides, stepped into the mud, and gradually walked away. That day, Zhang Julu remembered the name of that young warrior. Su Xiao. That year, the era name of Eternal Hui hadn't been used. Of the 2 young men he met, one wasn't the powerful Grand Secretary of the Imperial Court, and the other wasn't a great general with unconferred merits. Nor were they political enemies who had no dealings with him. At the end of the first year of Auspicious Talisman, only Zhang Julu, an old man, was left. The old man, standing on the Imperial Road, slowly came to his senses. He smiled and muttered to himself, "I don't like to drink. If I can meet you underground, I'll have to buy you a drink. But before that, let me hold the umbrella for Bailiang. Not for you, Su Xiao, but for the people of Bailiang and Liang." At the end of the auspicious year, Emperor Zhao Tuan returned to the capital. The Imperial Censorate and the 6 departments jointly impeached one person. Grand Secretary Zhang Julu of Liang issued an edict, and the Imperial Court announced the 10 great crimes. The Emperor issued an edict to execute 9 generations. Chapter 1326. In Xianxia, where Guangling Road and Nanjiang Road intersected, it was famous because of a relatively young apricot alley. On both sides of this alley were courtyards in Jiangnan. Although they were not grand, they were exquisite. The residents were not high-ranking officials or dignitaries, but scholars who had fallen on hard times and did not participate in Hong Jia's escape to the north. There were survivors of West Shu who lived in seclusion, and there were also disheartened teachers from Shangyin Academy. When these scholars settled down, they were really short of money and could not build any large residences. The mansion of the Fan family was located in the deepest part of Apricot Alley. The Fan family was once a wealthy family in the southern Tang. The ancestors of this branch of the Fan family did not want any treasures when they separated from the family before they fled. They only wanted the library that was the hardest to carry around. In the past 20 years, they had been struggling to make ends meet. If they did not rely on selling the ancient books in the new building, they would have been reduced to a situation where they did not have enough food to eat. Liang was prosperous, the country was prosperous, and so was the chess. Fortunately, The Fan family produced a chess addict who did not like fame, Fan Zhongho, and Liang Imperial Court's Tanhua Wu Xianxia were known as the first two ninth. Before the two were 30 years old, they were invincible south of the Guangling River, especially Tanhua Wu Xianxia, who later became one of the 8 talents of the capital. After passing the imperial examination, he was personally appointed by the emperor to fight against the 4 great national players of Liang. He won all 4 battles and obtained an incredible record. Fan Zhongho, who had a slight advantage in the battle of first and second, was vaguely the number 1 player in Liang's chess world and received the new title of Fan Tendan. The Apricot Alley, where Fan Zhongho lived, was bustling with carriages and horses. However, this chess addict had been refusing visitors. Fan Zhongho, who was gentle and generous on the chessboard, seemed to be particularly unapproachable in real life. The Fan family's library was in the Relief Heart and Begging for Forgiveness pavilions. The Begging for Forgiveness pavilions had 3 floors on the top of the mountain, with 6 rooms each. There were corridors in the front and back, and in front of the building was a square patio. It covered an area of 3 mu and was paved with green bricks. Not long ago, Fan Zhongho, who had just become the head of the Fan family, set a number of strict rules for the collection of books. Among them, there was a rule that no books could be collected from the cabinet. Women with different surnames and surnames were not allowed to enter the cabinet. The keys to the cabinet were controlled by the first son of the family. Today was a warm winter day, suitable for drying books to get rid of mold and dampness. An elegant-looking man in a green robe took out handfuls of printed books from the attic and spread them out on the green brick floor of the courtyard in front of the Seeking Forgiveness pavilion. He did it himself and did not let the servants do it for him. A young girl whose cheeks were flushed red from the sun was squatting on the ground, casually flipping through the books. She wasn't reading with great interest, but was frowning. Looking at her back, the man smiled and stretched. He caught a glimpse of a huge figure sitting on the edge of the patio, where sunlight and shadows intersected, silently. The man's happy mood was clouded. The way this tall giant had visited the Fan family was extremely shocking. He hadn't presented a name card or knocked on the door. Instead, he had fallen from the sky and smashed into the pond in the Fan family's backyard. At the time, Fan Zhongho had been playing chess with someone and had sunk into a long and exhausting thought. The person playing chess had him bring the visitor. Fan Zhongho ordered the servants in the family who heard the noise not to make a sound. Then, this tall and burly man, like a celestial being, had been inseparable from the old and the young, never speaking. It was Fan Shirduan. The man walked to the old man's side. The old man was sitting on a small stool. In front of him was a gold-threaded Nama chessboard. At his hand was a small cup of white salt, a plate of crisp white radishes, and a bowl of white rice. After the tall, golden-skinned guest had appeared, the old man had laid out the game in front of him. Then, he hadn't placed a piece, saying nothing. Unless the young girl spoke to the old man, even if Fan Zhongho said something, the old man would be too lazy to respond. Fan Zhongho was standing behind the old man. Facing the chess game that had already been set up, his heart was full of suspicion. The black and white chess pieces crisscrossed like canine teeth. This was a classic game of strength. It didn't pay much attention to the shape of the game, but in Fan Zhongho's view, this game was far from worthy of the old man's attention. It had to be known that in the eyes of the world, Fan Zhongho had learned without a teacher, and it was publicly acknowledged that he was slow. In terms of talent, he was worlds apart from Wu Xianxia, who had made his name at a young age. It was only through his tenacity that he had been able to become a late bloomer. A few years ago, he had finally been able to match Wu Xianxia. But of course, Fan Zhongho had a master, and it was Huang Longsher of the spring and autumn chess armor. If not for this, Fan Zhongho's late bloomer would have been 20 years later. In today's world, the 9th Dan was the highest level of Go. The top national players who were, by the emperor's side, waiting for the imperial decree were all unquestionably strong 9th Dan. There were also some experts in the countryside who possessed the strength of 9th Dan, but they weren't necessarily strong. As for the princess of Baoyang, Su Weisheng, who had become famous for her studies at the Yin Academy, There was a saying called Su Shi in 13. Su Shi said that this woman's strength was far beyond a 9th Dan expert, and she was fully deserving of the title of Great 10th Dan. Su Shi-san said that she was often able to play the unfathomable and marvelous moves of the 13th Dan. Therefore, she could be considered a first-rate Go master on the same level as Chao Guanzi of West Chu. Fan Changho admitted that he could barely bear the title of 10th Dan, but when compared to Su Weisheng and Chao Chongqing, there was a huge gap of 1 stone. As for comparing himself to this master in front of him, this was a pleasant reunion between master and disciple. His master had given him 2 stones, but Fan Changho still lost all 10 games. The old man stared at the chessboard. He picked up a pinch of salt and sprinkled it on a radish. He asked, "Yue Tian, do you still remember what I said to you when we played our first game of chess?" Fan Zhongho, who was known by the courtesy name of Yue Tian, replied respectfully, "Master said 2 things. One was that true skill lies outside of chess. The other was that no matter how good you are at chess, it's all there is to it. There's a world of difference between knowing how to play chess and knowing how to behave." Huang Longshi, the number 1 devil of the spring and autumn period, grunted in agreement. He chewed on the bland and slightly salty radish. "That's why, other than teaching you how to play chess, I also want you to not delay your studies. Now that Wu Songxian has become famous in the capital, you don't have to fight for anything. Instead, you're even more famous than Wu Songxian. In the future, no matter who sits on the dragon throne in the Liang imperial court, there will be a place for you." Fan Zhongho asked softly, "Why does Master want me to be on good terms with His Royal Highness, the King of Yinxi? Is it because the Emperor killed Grand Secretary Zhang Julu and was disappointed?" Huang Longshi smiled and asked, "Yue Tian, don't tell me you think Bai Yin shouldn't have been killed?" Fan Zhongho didn't dare to be mysterious in front of his master. He said frankly, even if the Emperor wanted to pave the way for Crown Prince Xiao Zhuan, killing Zhang Julu alone would be enough. Killing all 9 of his family members would be too much. Huang Longshi smiled and said, "Let's not talk about the importance of the matter. First, tell me why Bai Yin was a dead end." Fan Zhongho walked to the opposite side of the chessboard and sat upright. He said in a deep voice, "Grand Secretary Zhang Julu promoted the imperial examination and opened the Dragon Gate for the poor children. Moreover, under Zhang Julu's protection, people like Yin Maochun and Zhao Yuling appeared. Not only were they capable officials, but under the protection of Zhang Julu, they were able to smoothly soak in the officialdom for many years. They became more familiar with the emperor's thoughts and the rules of the imperial court. They knew how to protect themselves and also knew how to accumulate power while leaving their names in the annals of history. These officials were different from those loyal officials in the spring and autumn period who were willing to die if the emperor wanted them to. Even if the emperor wanted them to die, the officials didn't have to die, but they weren't willing to commit suicide. In the future, there would be a continuous stream of poor and important officials. Since they were born in the marketplace, it didn't matter if they lost the family property they had accumulated over decades. At certain moments, they weren't like the deep-rooted children of the aristocratic families. They were more willing to sacrifice themselves. Zhang Julu was the creator of the spring of Yonghui and the instigator of the poor people wearing purple and yellow. This is death. Huang Longshi grabbed a handful of white rice and stuffed it into his mouth. He smiled slowly and said, "It's far from enough. The Crown Prince Zhao Zhuan is going to ascend the throne. If nothing unexpected happens, he will be an emperor in a time of peace and prosperity. He won't have any military exploits. But if the imperial court has Zhang Julu for civil affairs and Gu Jiantang for military affairs, it will be extremely difficult for the new emperor, Zhao Zhuan, to convince the masses. The current Son of Heaven has continuously tested the Grand Secretary Darren, Jean Lanting's impeachment, the great General Yang Shenxing's mentioning of the loyal lie of Ji Zhou's Han family, making an exception to promote Chai Juanwang's son-in-law Chen Wang, summoning Qi Yanglong to the capital, reactivating the Hall Secretariat's subordinate provinces to contend with the minister of Shangshu. Various methods have been pressing on the Grand Secretary step by step. Zhang Julu seems to have chosen to retreat step by step from the beginning to the end, dismantling Zhao Yuling's power on his own, abandoning one after another Zhao Yuling, Yin Maochun, and Bai Gua, leaving behind only Wang Xiong'e, who was publicly recognized as the most lacking of the prime minister's support. Even when the last pillar of Zhonglu, the minister of revenue, Wang Xiong'e, was demoted to Guangling's magistrate and left the capital, Zhang Julu still didn't make a sound. Speaking to this point, Fan Zhongho paused for a moment. But as long as Zhang Julu doesn't die, even if he takes the blame and resigns, this civil official leader will return to his hometown and live in seclusion in the mountains after losing his position. Then Grand Chancellor Qianlong, who was originally used to contend with Zhang Julu, will be in an awkward position. Moreover, how old is Zhang Julu, and how old is Qianlong? When the time comes, as soon as the world situation changes, Zhang Julu, who is not in the imperial court but in Jianghu, will instead have the opportunity to become the savior of the world. Today, the disparity in treatment between Zhang Julu and Qianlong, as well as their positions in the hearts of the people, will coincidentally be reversed when the time comes. How can His Majesty not understand the logic within? How can he leave a mess for the crown prince? If it's just this argument, without the first death of Zhang Julu, as I said earlier, it can still be used as a check and balance for the monarch to control his subjects. However, since it will be a dynasty without major wars in the future, and there will be more and more talented people in the imperial court, the emperor's spring of auspicious talisman is not inferior to Zhang Julu's spring of eternal hui. Why should the Zhao family keep you, Zhang Julu, around? Huang Longsher nodded. Zhang Julu has been a timely help in these 20 years, so he can't be killed. In the future, he can only be the icing on the cake. His tail can't be removed, so he can indeed be killed earlier. This is also considered death. 2 of them are dead. Continue. Chapter 1327. Obviously, Fan Zhongho had a card up his sleeve. He had already prepared a bellyful of drafts. Without any pause to ponder, he spoke tirelessly. The previous 2 deaths were the current son of Heaven's funeral matters. Right now, Yang Mang's war and pacification of Guangling are the most urgent matters at hand. During his lifetime, Zhang Julu made enemies on all sides. 3 of his mortal enemies were the imperial family's nobles, the influential family civil officials, and the local military generals. These 3 had been suppressing their monstrous resentment toward the Grand Secretary Darren. For the past 20 years, the imperial family's clansmen had lived like rats on the street. At first, they originally thought that when the late Emperor Zhao of Liyang unified the world, they were all meritorious officials. Plus, they were surnamed Zhao, so naturally they could share the country with the emperor. Unexpectedly, Su Xiao and Zhang Julu, 2 people, 1 civil, 1 military, took all the credit. How could they bear it? With Zhang Julu, this roadblock, standing in the imperial court for 1 day, how could those aristocratic families' officials have a chance to stand out among their peers 1 day? The more selfless Zhang Julu was, the more difficult it was for this group of people to obtain benefits for their clans. At that time, Zhang Julu wanted to make a bold and decisive move to control the officials, the salt administration, and the transport of grain, 3 things bumping into each other. The old Xianxia of the Ministry of Works did not hesitate to offend the Grand Secretary Darren to stand up for him and obstruct him from within. Who did the old Xianxia stand up for? Naturally, it was for the civil officials of this large group of clans who were entrenched in the local areas. The struggle between civil and military officials is the usual practice of the previous dynasties. Zhang Julu could rely on his skill to settle the arrogance of the party and government, but using Guangling's Jingnan's overt plot, seizing the opportunity to continuously weaken the vassals and suppress the military. Yan Jinshuan, Yang Xinxing, several major vassal kings, all became chess pieces whose strength was damaged. Those generals who held military power in their hands could not bear it. The emperor killed the evil man Zhang Julu, letting the 3 factions vent their resentment. It could be said to be killing 2 birds with 1 stone. Afterwards, The new son of heaven appeased the people. It could be said to be killing 3 birds with 1 stone. Huang Longshi's expression was calm as he said, "This is also death. But there's one thing you didn't tell me. The reason for this death is that if Zhang Julu is removed from office when he's at the peak of his power, then the 3 enemies of Zhang Julu, who have been holding grudges against him for a long time, can be considered to have vented most of their resentment. Anger is easy to vent, but difficult to gather. In the future, if they want to fight with Green Eyes again, it will be difficult for them to have the determination to fight to the death. If they fight with Green Eyes with this mentality, even if they have the support of the new emperor, they will still be easily defeated by Zhang Julu, and the Green Party will be divided and conquered." Fan Zhongho said solemnly, "This disciple understands." Huang Longshi reached out to grab the few remaining radishes. He glanced at his disciple who had won the title of Buddha in the chess world and asked, "That's it? Compared to your Xiao Shidi in Xiangfan City, the difference is too great." Fan Zhongho smiled and said, "It's one thing for Zhang Julu not to form his own clique and cut off his own wings, but he also deliberately parted ways with his biggest helper, Tantanon, completely reducing himself to a loner. If not for this, how could those ignorant scholars have the guts to throw the letter of accusation in front of Zhang Julu's door and fish for compliments?" This scene was exactly the same as when a scholar with a scholarly title had to scold Su Xiao for being a butcher. If Huan stood firmly by the Grand Secretary's side, forget about this group of hot-blooded scholars. Even Jin Samlang wouldn't have this kind of boldness. Without Huan, Zhang Julu will die again. Huang Longshi declined to comment. He only changed the topic. Squinting his eyes, he looked at the salt and the bowl of rice and said with a laugh, "A famous scholar's romantic life is full of anecdotes. These anecdotes, circulating among the imperial court and the common people, are just like the scholar's salt. Just eating plain white rice is tasteless. You won't die, but you lack that kind of essence, qi, and spirit." Earlier, when Liang was located in a remote corner where the military towns stood in great numbers, all day long the scholars were bullied by the martial artists until they were half dead. Naturally, there was not even a far of anecdotes. Baiyan was indeed extraordinary. In just one short Yonghui, there was already the Hanlin Academy's guard at the Yellow Gate who fell asleep drunk. The Son of Heaven personally draped a fur coat over her. Tantanon was warming wine in the forbidden area, discussing the world with a pot of wine. That's why I say, although the scholars of the world still have their knees bent, their waists can finally straighten. Fan Zhongho raised his head and glanced at the books sprinkled by the sunlight, sighing with emotion. The memory of a stray dog wandering from place to place when I was a child is still fresh in my mind. Those generals stationed at the checkpoint only recognized gold and silver. Making things difficult for me everywhere is one thing, but what I found most difficult to let go of was when they used their spears to lift up the book chests. The chests full of books, the lifeblood of scholars, were scattered all over the ground, wantonly trampled on. I think a world where books can safely bask in the sun is a good world for us scholars. After sighing with emotion, Fan Zhongho took a deep breath and said, "Zhang Julu cheated in the imperial examination. His eldest son embezzled fertile land, and the local clans and people fought over benefits. The evidence of his crimes is conclusive." Speaking to this point, Fan Zhongho laughed bitterly and said, "What if funny evidence of his crimes is conclusive? The latter two should be true, but if you say that Zhang Julu leaked the exam questions, I'm afraid everyone would find it absurd. Regardless of what the truth is, together with the Han family tragedy that implicated the old Grand Secretary, this is another death." Fan Zhongho's hands clenched in a fist and rested on his knees, vaguely a bit angry. If that's all, then that's that. But among the 10 great crimes, there's actually the matter of colluding with the border army. Colluding with who? Tilting half the country's taxes to build the Eastern Front to resist Bemang. That was the outline of the country established by the late emperor. What crime did Zhang Julu commit? Huang Longshi shook his head and said, "This crime is the most cryptic. You guessed wrong. This crime isn't about Gu Jiantang, it's about Bailiang. Of course, There is also the intention of knocking down Gu Jiantong's hundreds of thousands of border soldiers in passing. After Zhang Jiulu took power, it seemed like he was advancing step by step, doing his utmost to suppress Bailiang's Su family. But in reality, that was all on the surface. The benefits that Bailiang's border army should have obtained didn't decrease. If it was someone else who became the Grand Secretary, the imperial court might be in a foul mood, but at the very least, Bailiang's side would suffer even more. This is Zhang Jiulu using the loss of the relationship between ruler and subject as the price, exchanging for a hidden stability for the dynasty's northwest. This, of course, is death. Fan Zhonghe was stunned. He then stood up. Facing the north, he gave a heavy bow of respect. Chapter 1328. Huang Longshi sneered. Do you feel more and more that Bai Yin didn't deserve to die? Don't be fooled by the fact that there are countless people secretly clapping and cheering for the chief minister's downfall. In fact, the truly discerning people, especially scholars like you who sincerely believe that the people are more important than the monarch, are all gritting their teeth in silence. Do you think that just because everyone seemed to be cursing lame Su at that time, everyone really hated Bailiang? Bai Yin, Tantanan, Gu Jiantang, Yin Jinshuan, Lu Baijia, Lu Xianxia, and Su Gong, and so on. Do you really only hate them and not respect them? You must know that at that time, Su Xiao led Bailiang's personal cavalry to the south, leading Gu Jiantang's direct subordinate General Kai Nan to intercept the Su Fengyan at the border. A total of 60,000 men and horses, when faced with that old cripple, let alone fighting him, they directly knelt down and said, "This general greets the king of Bailiang," clearly in the ears of many officers and soldiers. Not only did he, who was entrusted with high hopes by the imperial court to reduce Bailiang's living space, but the 60,000 armored soldiers all had the same thought. They regarded seeing great General Su Xiao from afar as the greatest glory of their lives. In the end, it was Su Xiao who replaced Gu Jiantang to inspect the Gu family's armored cavalry. The civil officials in the imperial court were indignant in private, but the generals and soldiers all over Liang didn't feel that there was anything shameful about it. Su Xiao is so domineering and domineering. He deserves it. Zhang Jiulu has a scholar like you silently in his heart, and Bai Yin also deserves it. Therefore, this is Bai Yan's death again. Huang Longshi expressionlessly picked up a chess piece from the chess box and said softly, Crown Prince Zhao Zhuan doesn't have a good impression of this chief assistant. He once tried to befriend Zhang Jiulu's youngest son, Zhang Bianguan, but to no avail. In times of chaos, military generals were nurtured, while in times of peace, civil officials were valued. This person was destined to be a literati emperor, but in order to balance the civil and military, he had to continue the chess game left by the late Emperor Zhao Dan, where the three provinces of the Hall of Governmental Affairs kept each other in check. There would be more cabinet ministers than the current one, but there definitely couldn't be a civil official leader. Zhao Zhuan needs to sit firmly on the dragon throne, and Zhang Jiulu will die. Zhang Jiulu saw things further than anyone else. He ruined his own reputation and left no way out, warning the future generations. Bai Yin was very clear that in the future, the pattern of the literati ruling the country would be formed. The etiquette of not being punished by a doctor would be repeatedly mentioned by the civil officials. Since the first year of Yonghui, the Hall of Governmental Affairs has been the dominant power. Not to mention the 6 ministers, even the assistant ministers have not been beheaded. If the current trend continues, it will be even more difficult to kill a literati official in the future. There's a very interesting development in this, and that is the greed of the imperial family and the children of the powerful clans. They more or less pay attention to table manners, but the civil officials who were born poor, after shaking off the mud on their bodies, they become even more shameless and their methods are even more secretive. Bai Yin was obviously well aware of this, so this death was his own request. But in my opinion, the death of a chief assistant is really not very useful to the future generations who are deteriorating with each passing day. But it is precisely because of this that I, Huang Longshi, admire Zhang Jiulu's death the most. The Emperor Zhao Dan wanted him dead. Zhang Jiulu was willing to die, and he died again. This death is the most helpless of the scholars and the imperial family, but it is also the most romantic of the scholars who have a clear conscience. Huang Longshi, who had been holding the chessboard with 2 fingers from beginning to end, no longer said anything. The salt, rice, and radish had long been eaten clean. Fan Zhongho said softly, "Zhang Julu has a 90% chance of dying." Huang Longshi lowered his head to look at the chessboard and asked with a smile, "They all say there's a 90% chance of dying. Do you think Bai Yin still has a slim chance of survival?" Fan Zhongho shook his head. "Everyone wants him dead, but he doesn't want to live. How can he live?" Huang Longshi knocked the white chess piece on the northeast chessboard and even rearranged its position. Fan Zhongho was very surprised. When his master played chess with him, he always placed his chess pieces as if they were flying, not to mention deliberately rearranging the positions of the chess pieces that had already been placed. This was because Huang Longshi had said that once a chess piece was placed, it would take root. The world had always been so ruthless. Even if there were longevity pills in the world, there was no medicine for regret. This made Fan Zhongho, who had lost interest in the chessboard, curious again. He looked carefully. While he was focused on finding the answer, Huang Longshi bent down and grabbed a black chess piece from the box. He looked at the west side of the chessboard and drew a circle there with 2 fingers holding the chess piece. He said indifferently, "Previously you saw me arrange this chessboard in one go. Don't be fooled by the fact that there seems to be a fierce battle here, where the black and white sides are killing each other with great strength. In fact, it is very laughable and may not affect the overall situation." Sitting opposite Huang Longshi, Fan Zhongho's heart skipped a beat. He looked down at the chessboard and asked, "This is the confrontation between Li Yang and Bai Meng." "This is Bailiang? Bailiang has 300,000 steel cavalry. How can it not affect the overall situation?" "Master, I really can't figure it out. Can you help me clear up my confusion?" Huang Longshi threw the black chess piece back into the box and said with a smile, "How can someone like you?" Fan shired in. "Guess the next step of Bai Meng's peace decree? Don't waste your brain. You won't be able to figure it out even if you were given 100 years. To be able to play chess with your skill is more or less enough. In the future, just think about how to fight for scholarly honors in the new dynasty. The higher one's chess skill, the weaker one's character." Fan Zhongho carefully glanced at his master. Huang Longshi said with a smile, "I'm talking about you ordinary people. Master and that Bai Meng imperial tutor are not among them." Fan Zhongho asked, "Then what about West Chu's Chao Chongqing?" Huang Longshi said with a smile, "Half and half. Knowing what can't be done yet doing it, he's just a fool. Chao Chongqing's entire second half of his life has been fighting for a single breath. It's meaningless." A laugh came from the distance. It seemed to be mocking this old man for bragging and pointing out the world. Huang Longshi was somewhat embarrassed. Fan Zhongho, seeing his master deflated, wanted to laugh, but didn't dare. Huang Longshi stood up and walked over to the little girl who was still flipping through the book. He rubbed her head and sighed with heartache. "Daughter, don't find trouble with that bronze man in the future. You can't kill him." The old man picked up a book and walked over to the Bai Meng bronze man grandmaster who had been thrown to the Guangling Road by Qi Xuanjin. But he was quickly squeezed between the two by Miss He. Huang Longshi had no choice but to move his butt to the side. He stretched out his hand and placed it on the book, feeling the warmth of the sunlight. He said, "When I was young, I went to visit Qi Xuanjin on the demon execution platform. That great spiritual master said, writing a book with a brush is not as good as the cool breeze flipping through the book. I, Huang Longshi, didn't believe and didn't agree. Otherwise, this trip would have been in vain." The bronze man grandmaster didn't say a word. Huang Longshi turned his head and asked, "How much longer?" The bronze man grandmaster still looked straight ahead with lifeless eyes. This side of the courtyard of the begging for forgiveness pavilion returned to silence. Day after day, the whole world finally knew that the current Grand Secretary Zhang Julu had died in prison. At that time, the world remembered an old bastard who deserved to die, but didn't die. It seemed that a long time ago, he had given the Grand Secretary, who was at the peak of his power, an unlucky prophecy. It's at New Year's Eve. At that time, everyone suddenly realized that all of the great demon Huang Sanjia's assertions had come true one by one. New Year's Eve, the end of the moon and the end of the year, so it was connected to the end of the new year. The old year was thus removed, and a new year was exchanged. On New Year's Eve of the first year of auspicious talisman, everyone in Apricot Alley, regardless of age, was burning lanterns to welcome the new year. The Fan family was the same. In front of the relaxing pavilion, the Bronze Man Grandmaster stood in the middle of the courtyard, looking up at the sky. The little girl and Fan Zhongho sat on the stone steps. The little girl's face. Fan Zhongho, on the other hand, was like a child, sobbing with his head lowered. During the day, for the first time, his master patiently told him a lot of things, a lot of reasons. He told him about the plans and arrangements of several great advisors who were still alive. He told him about the strengths and weaknesses of Li Yang's crown prince, Zhao Zhuan, and Yin Qi's heir apparent, Zhao Zhuan. He told him how he should coordinate with his little martial brother Lu Su, how he should rise above the others in the bloody struggle between several great powers. He even told him how to succeed and retire. Finally, his master told him a very inexplicable sentence, just like the conclusion that the history books of later generations gave him. Fan Zhongho. Fan Zhongho loved fame, was good at politics, had brilliant literary talent, was cruel on the inside but gentle on the outside. He was one of the 6 ministers of Li Yang's resurgence. In the pavilion, the old man who occupied the top 3 positions of spring and autumn held an oil lamp in his hand, quietly walking between the bookshelves. The wick of the lamp gradually burned shorter and shorter. As the new year approached, the wick of the lamp became shorter and shorter. The flame of the lamp flickered and was about to be extinguished. Huang Longshire walked to the window and looked at the night sky. With a carefree smile, he murmured, "I am very happy to meet you all. Yi Baikue, Su Xiao, Zhang Julu, Yuan Bunshi, Li Yishan, Zhao Chongling, Gu Jiantang, Nalan Yusi, Huan Wan, Qiang Long, Chao Chongqing, Li Xiaoxin." The old man raised the oil lamp. "To all of you, to spring and autumn, to your golden spears and armored horses, to your free and easy style." The old man opened the window and casually threw the oil lamp out of the window. He roared with laughter. "My life, how magnificent!" Chapter 1329. In the first year of Xiangfu, the situation of the Guangling Road made people's hearts ache while silently criticizing them. Yang Xinxing's troops had been caught in a jar, and Yin Jinchuan's 30,000 elite cavalry had been completely annihilated. Although the ending was bad, they had still fought the West Chu rebels. Compared to this, the hesitation of the Jingnan king's troops made the entire court feel that it was absurd. After the Duke of Huainan Zhao Ying led his army out of the territory, he camped at Mount Hua and did not move. After the Duke of Jinggan Zhao Sun's 6,000 cavalry arrived at Hao Ao Lake, they also did not make any movements. As for the crown prince of Yanxi, other than stirring up trouble on his way north, when he really reached the southern part of Guangling Road, he simply disappeared completely. Could it be that this crown prince of Huainan Zhao Ying was not aiming for Jingnan at all, but was swaggering over to fatten himself up? But in a few days it would be the end of the second year of the auspicious talisman. The Duke of Huainan's dispatch of troops raised people's spirits. Li Yang's impression of this vassal king, who was known for his weak temperament, greatly changed. In one fell swoop he defeated the east of Huashan, the yellow goat, the small fish, and the hatred, these 3 obstacles. Song Wuyang, the general of Huangyang Pass, had joined the rebellion. He raised the Jiang flag in the pass. However, King of Huainan, Zhao Ying, led his army 1 mile away from the pass and asked Song Wuyang to surrender. Song Wuyang was ordered to be shot by the crossbow, but Wang Zhun suddenly killed him. Wang Zhun then opened the gate to welcome Zhao Ying's army. King of Huainan sent Wang Zhun's 3,000 men as the vanguard to attack Small Fish Pass. Ji Yun, the general of Huainan, refused to surrender. Zhao Ying gave the order to attack and personally supervised the battle. Wang Zheng's troops braved the rain of arrows to fill up the trenches and then used ladders to siege the city. After 2 sieges, they lost 500 men. Wang Zheng, who personally led the charge, was covered in blood. He requested for a truce, but Zhao Ying did not allow it. He allowed Wang Zheng to watch from the side and ordered his troops to attack the city. At dusk, an endless stream of ballistae, catapults, and battering rams arrived at the battlefield. Both sides fought until night fell, and 800 Huainan soldiers died. Zhao Ying held onto his whip and rode on his horse under the Zhao flag, unmoved. The next morning, they attacked the city again. Zhao Ying's trusted general, Xia Ping, led 80 men to attack the city for the first time. All of them died. Xia Ping's body was stabbed down to the ground by Ji Yun with an iron spear. Wang Zhen angrily asked for a battle. His armor had 6 to 7 arrows embedded in it. He was hit by a huge rock and fell to the ground. When he got up, he was splashed by a pot of boiling oil and fell to the ground. His men risked their lives to carry him back. Zhao Ying, who was wearing the bright yellow royal robe, looked at the fierce battle. His ears were filled with the screams and shouts of killing on the city wall, as well as the beating of the drums beside him. Of course, there was also the sound of the flag with the word Zhao fluttering in the cold wind. This man, surnamed Zhao, who had always been a target of ridicule in the Liang dynasty, slowly raised his head and looked at the word Zhao embroidered on the flag. He pursed his lips as if he was finally relieved of a heavy burden after so many years. The siege's side had switched to the 4th battering ram. More than half of the huge ballistae, which could reach up to 300 steps away and still had considerable lethality, had been destroyed. The crossbows on the few crossbows at the small fishy pass had long run out of arrows to shoot. They were scattered and had lost their momentum. However, the small fishy pass, which swore to live and die with the city, was still struggling. Its defense was fierce. More than 2,000 spikes that were 5 inches long and weighed 6 ounces, and the 4 sides of the spikes were all broken. The thick ropes of the Yixias and charioteers that could be retrieved by the winches on the city wall were broken. However, there were still brave soldiers on the city wall, constantly throwing down sharp iron hooks and long iron chains that formed iron hooks. After they were thrown out, they could hook onto the armor or even the body of the besiegers and hang them in the air like fishing. There were also strangely shaped iron hooks and axes that were used to stab the arms of the besiegers. Zhao Ying, who was slightly closer to the battlefield, saw with his own eyes that a soldier's entire arm was cut off. That arm fell down from the city wall before the soldier. Zhao Ying was indifferent to this, and with an indifferent expression, he turned his horse around. The small fishy pass that was in imminent danger called for help. Ji Yun had no choice but to order the cavalry out of the east gate to seek help from him. They agreed that both sides would launch a surprise attack on the Duke of Huainan's camp at dawn. At that time, the small fishy pass would take the initiative to open the gate and charge out with 200 cavalry. Ji Yun would lead the charge, and behind the cavalry would be the remaining 400 men of the small fishy pass. Zhao Ying ordered the experts under his command to lead 10 elite scouts to pursue and kill. Unexpectedly, they still escaped with injuries. The next day, Ji Yun, who knew that the small fishy pass would not be able to be defended, had the heart to die. He and the 200 cavalry appeared at the city gate. Regardless of whether Hen came to help or not, he would fight to the death for Chu. Ji Yun, who was in the prime of his life, was not someone who did not care about his life, nor was he someone who did not understand the current situation. However, when he was 20 years old, his father, who should have given him the crown, did not appear. There were also no guests to attend the ceremony. He was the one who gave himself the crown. This was because the general of Chu, Ji Hai, had already died on the battlefield. His 3 uncles had also died on the battlefield. Sitting on the war horse, Ji Yun ordered his subordinates to open the city gate. He turned around and looked at the faces under the light of the torches. He did not say anything and just clasped his fist. This day, the general of the West Chu rebel army, Ji Yun, went out of the city at dawn to attack the Duke of Huainan. However, The Zhao Ying's army seemed to have expected this and formed up in an orderly manner. Out of the three passes, Hen Pass, which had the most cavalry, did not care about the order of the Western Front General, Xianxia, to defend. The 800 cavalry and 2,500 infantry rushed out to help. However, they were attacked by the main force of Zhao Ying, who was waiting for an opportunity. The 800 cavalry in the vanguard suffered heavy casualties under the crossbow fire, and the army collapsed. In the chaos, the main general and deputy general were shot dead by the Duke of Huainan's cavalry, leaving only the old and weak soldiers behind. Hen Pass was earlier than the small Fishy Pass, and a group of soldiers changed to a large flag with the word Zhao on it. Hen Pass infantry commander led 700 men back to the city and committed suicide. After 3 charges, Jian was killed by an arrow from the Duke of Huainan's general, Hodatong. It pierced through his head, and he fell off his horse and died. The 200 cavalry and 400 infantry at the small Fishy Pass all died in the charge. Zhao Ying, who was wearing an eye-catching robe, got off his horse and walked past the corpses. He slowly walked up the city wall and looked at the rising sun in the east. He smiled and said, "The sun shines brightly, and the lambs feel warm." The Duke of Huainan, who had won 3 passes in succession, did not send a single report of victory to Great Peace City. He did not even take over the dangerous pass of Guanglingdao. In reality, after this vassal had won the pass, he had no intention of dividing his forces to digest the fruits of his victory. He only had the heavily injured Wang Zhun and his remaining troops stay at Yellow Go Pass. After putting up the Zhao flag on the city walls of the 3 passes, he led all the Huainan Dao soldiers to continue east, heading straight for the dangerous and difficult-to-attack Yayu Pass. Between these 2 passes was a rarely seen plain on the west side of Guanglingdao. After the Duke of Huainan reorganized himself at Hen Pass, he brought all the war horses that could be ridden and slowly advanced. It was as if he was quietly waiting for the Chu to rush to Yayu Pass. That genius general who made the entire Liang dynasty remember his name at such a young age, Xie. On the plains closer to Yayu Pass, both sides had enough time to reorganize themselves in scouts. The Duke of Huainan, Zhao Ying, got off his horse and put on an exquisite armor over his robe. He carried a quiver of arrows that he had kept for many years. This Duke of Huainan, who was ridiculed for having great ambition but little talent, was a pitiful person who had been scolded by the emperor many times. This was a man who had no children after his eldest son died for no reason at Dantong Pass. Jumping onto his horse, Zhao Ying looked straight ahead. He smiled at the 2 generals that had followed him for many years. Hodatong, Yu Qianshan, Xiaoping was 1 step ahead of us. Like the few of us agreed when we were young, we will die on the battlefield. Now it is our turn. After so many years, I've caused you to live such a pitiful life. Hodatong laughed and said, "It is indeed a pitiful life, but it is a quick death. Later, I will kill a few more West Chu bastards. I guarantee that old Xia will die from anger." "Ha! I forgot that this guy is already dead." Yu Qianshan looked more like an elegant strategist waving a feather fan than the boorish Hodatong. However, he still wore armor and carried a sword. He smiled and said, "You guys are really straightforward. It has been hard on a scholar like me." Before Zhao Ying gave the order to charge, he closed his eyes and said softly, "Father, I am unfilial. I have not had the chance to toast in the imperial mausoleum. Today, I will use blood in place of wine." In front of the Duke of Huainan, Zhao Ying, there were 2,000 heavy armored infantrymen in formation. On the 2 sides of the infantrymen, there were 1,000 elite cavalry. There were also close to 1,000 cavalry roaming far away, waiting for an opportunity to strike. On this day, except for the 4,000 soldiers and horses that were recruited from all over Huainan, Zhao Ying, Hodatong, and Yu Qianshan, as well as all of his personal guards, were all killed in battle. None of them were killed by an arrow in the back, and none of them were killed by the cavalry roaming behind them. On the same day, the king of Jing and Zhao Sun rushed all the way from Haoao Lake after hearing the news. At dusk, he arrived at the periphery of the battlefield. He knew that the situation was hopeless. He knew that there were still 1,000 heavy cavalry at Yaoyu Pass. He saw with his own eyes that the Duke of Huainan's corpse was knocked off his horse by a West Chu general. The young king of Jing and Zhao Sun still decided to lead the charge. Out of the 6,000 Qingzhou cavalry, only 200 were left. They risked their lives to protect Zhao Sun as they fled the battlefield. In this battle, one of the two kings who participated in the war died, and the other was injured.